What's going on, everybody? This is the Collective Objective. If you were watching us previously, we were previously known as Table Talk. What we're trying to call this now is the Collective Objective Presents Table Talk. The reason being is, so if you're following us on Facebook, there was a few Unity experiments. So just to clear up any confusion, we made the Collective Objective page. Table Talk is a show where we talk about politics, current events, and kind of stay in that realm. There's going to be other shows coming soon that will be with different hosts and different topics of discussion. So, like I know, for example, Rick and Destiny were planning something coming up. I don't know what they're going to plan on calling that. But we're also going to have things like a gaming stream. It's all going to be within the Collective Objective, and we're also going to support some of our friends that also do podcasts as well. So if you are a podcaster, Alex is on tonight. He's also a podcaster, and you want to share your content, let us know. We'll be happy to do that. So tonight we have a few things we're going to talk about. We're going to start with current events, and there's a few things in the current events area that we're going to talk about, and then we're going to talk about the private prison system, which is actually going to kind of build into the American prison system in general, and how that kind of I don't want to give too much away, but kind of how that is systematically racist or systemically racist. I'm sorry. And then we're going to cover American imperialism, which that was something that Stacy had actually brought up. And Stacy and Nathan are going to kind of dive into that. And then I believe Alex will have the rebuttal. I'm not 100% sure. We had intended for Rob. I'm not sure. I don't know where everybody's stances are on it, but We'll see. We had intended for Sean and Rob to come on tonight. Sean might still come on. He's running a little bit late with work. Rob, unfortunately, is in the middle of a snowstorm, and they bumped up his kid's basketball game to tonight instead of tomorrow. They're expecting about 2 feet of snow out where he lives. So that being said, that being said, I will do my introduction. I am Justin. I am tonight's hosts. You will be seeing a lot more hosts in the future. We're still trying to work out the logistics of everything, but we're sticking to the Friday nights format. And so tonight I'm the host. I host Table Talk. And I am what you would call a progressive in Georgia, which I used to think was a rarity until recently. That being said, I will pass the mic to the right, and we will just kind of work clockwise if you guys don't mind. So how you doing, Alex?
I'm doing well, Justin. How you doing this evening?
I am doing great.
So my name's Alex. I also live in Georgia. I identify as a independent. I've been a registered independent. I did, however, vote for President Biden in this election. My podcast is called Depth of Perspective, where the truth has no bias. It is a strictly interview-based podcast where I pick a social issue and then I interview either guests or subject matter experts in that field, and then we explore that social issue. I have talked about victims of sex trafficking, and I've talked about a variety of other different issues in that regard. So if you know anybody that's interested in becoming a guest or a speaker on my podcast, just be sure to shoot me a message on Facebook. You can find my podcast on YouTube, Audible, and you can find it on Spotify.
Also, Alex, you said that you were streaming to Twitch tonight. If you want to,
I am streaming to Twitch tonight. N7 Smoke 27 is my tag on there. You just type that in the search engine at Twitch, and it'll pull right up. It should be in the comments section. Somebody can just drop that up here in the comments, please.
All right. How you doing, Nate?
Hey, how are we all? I'm here to spread the good news about Lula finally being totally exonerated from the complete and total sham witch hunt that put him in jail under Operation Car Wash. Spreading the good news. I'm here to talk about American imperialism in the second half. That was all I've got.
How you doing tonight, Rich?
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Richard here, Rick for most. Left-leaning, liberal Democrat. That's about it. Most people know my story. Here to really discuss just about anything and everything. I do have an interest in the American imperialism topic from the perspective from the other side of the pond. The future events, I'm sure will be fun. Everybody, I'm sure will weigh in on that. But just good to be here and good to be among peers, and pleasure to be here as always.
How you doing tonight, Destiny?
Looking forward to this. Really dove in deep on the for-profit prison, so I'm ready for that, and a couple other current events that I'm well versed in, so I'm ready to go. I'm a proud millennial, so take that. And Stacy.
Hello, how's it going? I'm Stacy. I hope Nathan did his homework because I did not. If this was a group project, if it was a group project, I'd be that person at the bottom taking the A after your hard work. So, yeah, I got distracted by cat videos this week, so I'll try my best though to give my
understandable.
Yes, So yeah, hopefully I'm not complete tomato or potato.
One of the vegetables. We'll go with that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that tomato's technically a fruit, but who?
Yeah. Are we gonna make that into bacon?
No.
Owned libtard.
Next time on Table Talk, avocados and tomatoes.
Alex Kirsch, owned by Facts and Logic.
Depends on the facts, depends on the logic.
So yeah, let's dive into current events. We got a lot of stuff to talk about tonight. Try to fit it into 2 hours. Might go a little bit over.
Okay.
So for current events, the first thing I want to talk about is Andrew Cuomo. Personally, I think I'm not going to excuse. There's a lot of people saying, well, you should let the trial play out. You should let the trial play out. Let there be an investigation. And I'm not of that opinion. I could understand that if it was one or two people, sure, I'd give maybe some benefit of the doubt, let the investigation play out or whatever. But when it's 6 women and counting, that kind of changes my opinion a little bit. And I also don't want to be a hypocrite because, a lot of times when, there's somebody that I don't agree with, I'll be one of the first people to call them out when they have questionable behavior, and I'll be like, they got to go. So when it's somebody that somewhat lies on my side of the spectrum, I would definitely want them called out and to be held just as accountable. Lead by actions. And practice what you preach. It's I understand, like, it sucks if you voted for Andrew Cuomo or if you align with him politically. It sucks. You don't want to believe it, but ultimately you have to give the people that are accusing him of this some believability. And that's part of the problem within rape culture is a lot of victims feel like they're not able to come forth because of people denying what they're saying is true, especially when it's somebody of power. So that's my 2 cents. I don't know what everybody else's is.
I guess I'll go first. I definitely think that there definitely needs to be an investigation because the people have to know. You can't just expect him to resign and then nothing happen after that. To me, that's not good enough because that's the main reason why stuff like this continues to happen. And I'm not going to just sit here and just say, well, he's guilty as charged, because the thing is, it's not that I want to discount the victims because they need to be heard, and I'm glad they're coming forward with this. But there has to still be an investigation, just like any other case. There has to be a trial. I don't care how powerful you are, okay? Because if he just resigns, and then that's all there is to it, they don't gain anything from it, honestly. So that's why there has to be an investigation. He needs to be brought up before a grand jury, just like anybody else would, and once it's determined that, he's definitely at fault, and I'm sure it's going to be traumatic for the victims. I have no doubt about that. However, at the end of the day, I want justice to be done. That's what I want. I want justice to be done just like any other case. It doesn't matter who it is. So.
Sorry, do you want me to go? Or can I go?
You don't have to ask permission. It's open format. So,
all right. The guy's clearly a creep. Let's just be honest. He's obviously displayed like a pattern of just really creepy and just really predatory behavior towards women. To whom he's in a position of power. I think what's actually going on, and the reason that the media is giving the giving it so much credence is actually the quote unquote establishment of the Democratic Party want him gone, because I think that there's 2 reasons for it. I think that first of all, I think that they see him as a liability for the midterms, because what are Republicans going to run on in the midterms? They're going to run on Andrew COVID nursing home, and secondly, I think it's also partly trying to clear the field for the presidential in 2024, because he would be a contender for the mediocre old white guy role, and the establishment, i.e. Biden, don't want that to happen, because they would be splitting the vote amongst voters naturally predisposed to vote for mediocre old white men. And because that would be very good for, frankly, the left if they had that. If they had Andrew Cuomo running in the primary in 2024, because it would split the centrist and the moderate vote between like the sort of deranged people that are like obsessed with Cuomo and defending him for all of his just creepy and disgusting behavior, and like sort of you would sort of peel that portion of people off of voting for a sort of more moderate candidate. So I think partly what's going on in the media now is that they're trying to clear the field. So that's why, because I think that's why it's being given so much credence by the elite media.
So before anybody else weighs in, I just want to. So this is a lot of like what I'm seeing on social media is people like what Brittany is saying, accusing him of touching their back in a picture, grab the pitchforks. It's not just one accusation of somebody saying he touched me on the back. It's 6 women have now come forth and said that he was sexually inappropriate with them. So I understand where you're coming from. Like, okay, you know, if somebody like touched somebody on the back in a picture, all right, that's not really sexual misconduct, but when it's 6 women saying that he was sexually inappropriate with them, I think that there deserves to be a little bit of believability to what's happening. I mean, if you think about it logically, go back to the Me Too movement. How did the whole Me Too movement work? It happened when somebody of power said this person was sexually inappropriate with me, and it empowered other women to come forth and say, oh my God, they felt empowered enough that somebody else came out against this person of power, and they were like, this happened to me too. And that's how the whole phrase came about. So what Andrew Cuomo is having happen to him is a Me Too moment. And that's kind of my 2 cents on it. Anyways, back to topic.
Yeah, I mean,
I just don't like this idea. I'm sorry. I just don't like this idea that we're so quick to jump on one side, you know, the side where maybe we don't align with, say, Republicans. But when it's someone on our side, we'll immediately start questioning it. Well, why is this person being accused? Is they want to get them taken out or out of politics? Why are we so quick to align and side with them and say, well, no, these women are lying, or, you know, they're not a victim? And it's just, we need to check ourselves.
So I don't know if anybody else has anything else they want to weigh in. Does anybody feel like he should resign from his position?
I think he probably will. I think he's probably going to end up resigning before the end of the weekend, very likely, because what's going to happen is, you know, now that he's been called to resign by a bunch of more senior Democrats, that's going to keep happening. They're going to get more and more senior. You know, now it's gone to like Chuck Schumer. You know, you're only a couple of steps away from the president. You know, that basically makes him, you know, his position basically untenable. Nobody's comparing him to, like, you know, a rapist. You know, nobody's saying he's like a pedophile like Donald Trump is or whatever. You know, it's not on the same level. I mean, you know, obviously Trump is a disgusting pedophile and Cuomo isn't, but it is still a pattern of like really inappropriate and disgusting behavior. You know.
I agree, and I think, you know, when it happens, you got to call it out. Like, it's just that. Like, I don't care. You know, I went over this over the summer when people were going through the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing, and, you know, I was like, you know, if Clinton is associated with Epstein, fucking bring him down. Like, I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's freaking President Obama. If President Obama was associated with Jeffrey Epstein, bring him down. Like, people that I align with politically, just because I align with them politically, does not negate the fact that they abused their power for sexual advances. And that's just, I'm not going to play that game.
Yeah, and
it's Kavanaugh all over again. You know, they were saying, oh, these women are lying. Well, now it's, you know, the liberals and some of them are saying, no, these women are lying. It just doesn't look good.
I mean, in the case of Kavanaugh, I think he was like credibly accused of like rape, basically. I don't think it's quite the same, but like the sort of,
obviously,
you know, but like the actual crime itself isn't the same. But like the actual, the sort of tendency to not believe it, you know, when it's allegations against Andrew Cuomo is, you know, that's obviously pretty hypocritical. I also think, like, frankly, isn't it convenient that nobody's talking about the nursing home cover-up?
So it's funny you say that, Nathan, because my aunt had actually mentioned something like that to in the comments when I posted something earlier on Facebook. She's like, I think it's a smokescreen because now nobody's talking about the mishandling of COVID by certain governors, and him in particular being probably the biggest one.
Ron DeSantis.
I don't think it's a smokescreen. I think it will still get talked about. It's just that's the shiny object right now.
Yeah, they
Right.
prefer to be talking about the sexual stuff. I think that's what it is.
It's possible.
You know, I mean, like, I mean, DeSantis is arguably worse because he sent a bunch of fucking goons to harass the whistleblower, you know, as punishment for for blowing the whistle on like the cover up, you know, whereas Andrew Quovid, he just did his mobster stuff over the phone, so that's a lot classier, but the cover up is still there.
So
I just want to weigh in real quick. So I think it's actually there's multiple layers to this. So on the one hand, you have the premise of Me Too, which is literally believe every woman, and that was sort of negated. When we didn't exactly acknowledge Biden's accuser. So we kind of threw the Me Too premise out the window at that point. So kind of which that wasn't right, honestly. I'm not saying that was the correct move, but that is what has in fact happened. We sort of nullified the validity of that by not really keeping face there. So that's kind of an us problem. But as far as believing women in that respect, it's multi-layered. For one, had a historical precedent that, even going back to Clinton, they described those women as, what was the phrase they like to use?
Hysterical?
No. Nuts and sluts defense, right? So that was the way of, so that was the way of undermining, so I guess that was the left's way, or the people who were defending Clinton's way of saying, well, I guess men will be men and yada yada. But that's yeah. Anyway, so absolutely, there's a moral force involved with this. You take even contrasting Trump and Biden. Trump has an endless sort of accusations. Where Biden, he had just the one, but there is a certain moral force associated with this type of behavior. I Alex, you mentioned that let the process play out and etc. But when you weigh it and measure it on a moral level, it's hard to deny. It's hard to keep that charitable gloss on it, especially with respect to Cuomo and all 6 of the alleged events. So it's really a dangerous situation we've put ourselves in with that philosophy, because we didn't really follow through with it the first time, which was a major letdown to women everywhere. So I'm not really sure how we move forward with that. But the only thing we can do, which I guess it kind of actually tethers into the whole issue with reforming not only the prison, but the justice system entirely, or not abolishing it. It just simply doesn't do the things that we want it to do. This is a case study for it, and many others. I mean, Kavanaugh, Biden, Trump. So yeah, there's a lot of issues going on with respect to this. But as Nathan says, Quovid, it's weird because I've seen conservatives a year ago calling him out for this exact thing, and I saw people on the left saying it was really more about Trump. Trump just simply veiled anything that Cuomo was doing at that time, and so now Trump is now on center stage, and it's just only a matter of time before Cuomo and like you said. You mentioned him covering up of the nursing home. It really is despicable. I mean, everything about the guy really seems despicable. So I fully agree with the premise of him resigning. He should go, and it's really a disgusting situation, and really a stain on the Democratic Party as a whole. Yeah.
I also like the fact that he fucking wrote a book where he was like masturbating about how well he did handling COVID after he just fucking covered it up. After he covered it up, I mean, that's psychopathic.
That's like the most horrible thing. And I remember, like I was talking about earlier, like at the chat, how the Rising went on Joe Rogan, and they talked about how everybody was giving Andrew Cuomo a pat on the back for the job he did when he actually did a terrible job managing the coronavirus in there. And but the problem is though is that you can't talk about that on CNN because you got Chris Cuomo on there, and he's a huge heavy hitter on CNN, and like that's something that needs to be brought to light. If you fail to do your job, I don't care what your position is, whether you're a governor, senator, or whatnot. I mean, if we're going to blast people for not being responsible, because if you're in an elected position, you were put there for a reason to look out for your constituents. And if you fail in that regard, you need to be put on blast about it, regardless of your political affiliation. So, I mean, I don't know enough about the situation. I mean, I'm sure Stacey could tell us more because she lives in New York, but I'm just going based upon what I've read. Could be wrong, but this is just what I've been reading right here. So,
I think they're going to force him out because he's becoming a liability to the state. Sorry, but when it comes to the government, the first thing they resort to is, holy shit, we're going to get sued again for the millionth time. So I think they're going to mostly force him out because A, it looks like it looks bad on the city and the state. And then obviously he becomes a potential lawsuit liability. And so that's obviously a bad look for that. So that's just my opinion. Can't wait for my taxes to go higher. Yay.
Actually, there's one more final thing. Actually, New York is in negotiations for the state budget right now, and Cuomo basically tried to use the budget to get basically his political enemies, as in like the Republicans and the left. He tried to get use it to get basically everybody to back off, saying oh, if you if you quit hammering me in the media, I'll pass a bill that you want under the budget process or whatever, something like classic sort of like quid pro quo mobster kind of thing that you would expect from somebody that comes from a corrupt political family like the Cuomos, but it basically ended up completely backfiring, and all of them have basically doubled down on this, and they're all coming out and they're saying, no, actually, you need to fucking go. And I think he's very likely gonna be gone by the end of the weekend. Now that the senior senator from his home state is saying he needs to go, he's gone by the end of the weekend.
Stacey, just so you know, I chew my nails too, so don't feel bad.
I know. I'm gonna go get that weird fish that I eat, and y'all all judge me on the side. Just chew on that instead.
Yeah.
So the last thing that I kind of wanted to say on this topic is if we don't call out our side when our side does something wrong, we become zealots, and that's just as dangerous as religious zealots, as political zealots. So that's just kind of my 2 cents. I think you guys are right. I think that he will be gone, if not by the end of the weekend, the end of next week. And it'll be good for New York, Stacey. So
taxes are still fucking high.
Make New York great again.
Yeah. It'll be great once the real estate agents all, die off. Like business-wise.
once they all get shot. Business-wise. Business-wise.
Yes, of course. Yes, those snakes.
Da, comrade.
Duh.
So the next topic was actually Destiny's current event topic. It's the vegan teacher, and I got a little clip on YouTube that I'm going to bring up, and then we'll talk about it. And just kind of see what everybody thinks about it.
Does anybody else find it funny that her name just happens to be Karen, for crying out loud?
It's fitting.
Extremely fitting.
Okay. So let me just maximize this real quick.
Yes. I need protein.
Oh wait, I don't know if did I share audio on that?
Is it 8 minutes long?
I could hear it.
I'm not gonna do a whole 8 minutes.
We've got to watch the whole thing.
Yeah, no, we're not going to do that. Just so people
Okay,
can get an idea of what we're
just
just so people get an idea of what we're talking about. Because
Okay,
Yeah,
you
so
hear
look at
vegan
all
teacher,
YouTube. Look
you're
at all
like,
YouTube.
you hear vegan teacher, you're like, oh, she must be a lovely lady. She's a vegan.
Wrong.
You'll say almost anything to try to get out of changing your habits. Because the meat tastes so good, right? The cheese, I know. But you gotta tell the truth to yourself. You don't need it.
Yeah, I do.
Have protein.
Yeah, I do.
If you don't believe me, watch.
She looks like she is very healthy.
Documentaries. The Game Changers and What the Health. Both of them are on Netflix.
Let's get to a better clip.
Unless it is absolute.
How old is she?
When is it necessary?
21.
When our own life.
That's what a vegan diet does to you.
Do you absolutely know?
Yeah,
that
it actually reverses age. Yeah.
There's no way to grow crops. There's no
Yeah,
other
I'll
way.
just spend money on plastic surgery.
So I was trying to get to some of the bad stuff. Destiny can kind of talk about some of the worst stuff. She's a avid TikToker, so she's well connected in the TikTok community. So I'm sure she knows some of the worst stuff. If you can kind of talk about that.
One thing she's done is tell people in the LGBTQ community that it's selfish to come out.
Of course.
She's compared veganism to the Holocaust, to the Black Lives Matter movement, and go on YouTube. And she actually wrote a song, I Can't Breathe, that was basically a mockery of the George Floyd death. She is gone after a religion, saying that if your religion allows you to eat meat, you need. One of the worst was she went after a gamer, a kid, 16, and sexualized him. She held up a cucumber and a couple pieces of fruit and said that to be vegan, he needed to push their women's, and then held up the fruit. And that's kind of what finally got her banned off TikTok, was sexualizing a minor.
She sounds like really emotionally well balanced. Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
She's more omega-3.
I think with some people, like
So happens years of without meat.
So I've been around some vegans, and they're not all like that. I'm perfectly say that, but it's just like I think she just kind of holds herself in high esteem, where she says, I'm a vegan, therefore I am better than you, therefore I am morally superior to you. And there are some that act like that. Of course, CrossFitters are just as guilty of that too. They say, I do CrossFit, look how awesome I am, and stuff like that. But it's just, I think it's just because she's probably just doing it for,
Clout.
for clout.
Yeah, clout
and it's
chaser.
working, because guess what she's going to do? She's going to get another TikTok account. She'll create another one, and she's going to keep doing it. Not that I agree with it. I think she said some really disparaging, disgusting things. She's talked about the military in a negative sense. She's talked about the LGBT in a sense. I don't care why you're doing it. It's just, if you do stuff like that, honestly, I have very little respect for you, because, we always talk about like how sticks and stones may break your bones, but words can never hurt you. For some people, they're very emotionally fragile, and that could actually cause them to go over the edge. And, some people like, oh, well, if she says it and other people saying it, then obviously it's true. So she has no idea how damaging she's actually being right now. So, I mean, there are some people, and I don't want to talk too long about it, but why some people like choose the vegan or vegetarian lifestyle, like my wife's vegetarian, and I don't have a problem with it really. Some people do it because they see the conditions that animals are kept in, and they just feel like they can't eat meat anymore, which is fine. That's fine. But it's just, when you go about it saying, I am a vegan, therefore I am superior to you, and comparing your cause to the Holocaust and stuff, you're being disingenuous, and you're actually making yourself look like a pariah of sorts. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Marjorie Taylor vegan.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, she's right now fighting for why she should be able to say the N-word.
I mean,
Wow.
And they're,
Good luck with that one.
yeah, we already did that one. We already answered that, didn't we? Come on.
The vegan bigot.
Jesus Christ. These fucking people.
So I don't. She's probably not going to go anywhere. Like Alex was saying, she'll probably still be around. She'll just make more TikToks, even if they try to ban her. And I feel bad because I just gave her a view I shouldn't have. What do we do as a society to combat people that are that bigoted?
Well, I think before too long, she ends up becoming like a really weird right-wing grifter, because like she'll keep getting banned from TikTok, and then she'll be like, "Oh my god, I'm the latest victim of cancel culture and whatever fucking nonsense." And then she'll because she's obviously like a clout chaser sort of thing. So I think she'll end up becoming like a weird sort of vegan Candace Owens.
Yeah, she'll get some kind of, obviously someone will support her, and they will find some kind of support, and she'll start a GoFundMe. Hopefully the GoFundMe will cancel her, but I think in the end it's as I'm eating fish, by the way, as protest.
You should probably write a book.
Yeah. And so I just I think I think a lot of times when people like that just come on, they're looking kind of like a Jake Paul kind of situation. You got this dick bag. He's constantly on the news, and you're going to still have people supporting him regardless of what crazy shit he does. And obviously we've seen the stuff he's done. You're just simply not going to stop everyone and anyone. I think it's just the best thing you can do is just be like, she's crazy, and try not to give her the attention she's clearly looking for. Yeah. Put that energy towards something more positive instead of giving it towards her.
Yep.
And I was being actually deadly serious when I said a vegan Candace Owens, by the way, because I know Don's laughing at it, but I'm completely serious, because when she's saying about what she's she's saying about how the N-word isn't racist, and why can they say it, why can't we? The right wing fucking loves that kind of thing, and one of the sort of weird grifting markets that the right is yet to break into is the sort of hippie vegan kind of market, because they've got the black conservative grifters market nailed. They've got people like Candace Owens, and they've got that absolutely locked down. But the hippie vegan grifter market is one that they're yet to branch into. And I think she's actually quite in some senses, I think she's actually quite a shrewd businesswoman.
It's brilliant actually.
Yep. I got nothing more on it. I got nothing for it. I see people like her all the time. She's just another category. Just that's all it is.
Well, they had what's his name, Milo. I can't even say
Milo
his name.
Yiannopoulos, the gay guy who's also anti-LGBT. That's what she will be.
Yep, he's no
longer. But now
gay.
Apparently he's not gay anymore.
He's ex-gay.
Now, now he's all for conversion therapy. I'm like,
I think he's basically trolling. Sorry, go on, Destiny.
If you guys don't know, conversion therapy is torture.
Mm-hmm.
It's literally torture.
Mm-hmm.
It's parents, they send their kids to a place, and they are shown images until they're supposedly straight.
I mean, it is really disgusting that that's actually allowed. Surely it would fall under the the constitutional protections against cruel and unusual punishment. It is really, really disgusting. But yeah, Milo Yiannopoulos not being gay anymore. I mean, I guess because he's no longer attracted to his black husband, he's also not racist.
Well, it's funny because I used to watch the hell out of Milo Yiannopoulos, and I used to watch all those guys, right? But now I just think Milo's gotten really obnoxious, honestly, and it's just, I think he's a fraud, honestly. He what was it when Gary and I have talked about people like Candace Owens, and he's actually been around Candace Owens and Charlie Kirk. He says they're all frauds. The one thing they all have in common is they're piggybacking off of the fame of Trump, and they're trying to hitch onto that. But once he disappears, they're pretty much not going to have anything after that. And I think he's got a very strong point to that. They're going to piggyback off him because if you are associated with that guy, you're essentially going to have a higher platform. And I think he's got a very strong point. But, now you see Stacey Dash. She used to be big on Trump. Now what's she doing? She is, backpedaling away from the whole movement, saying, you know what, this is what I was going through. And I know they talked about that on Durier's podcast yesterday. So,
well, that's a good point, because I think what's going to happen with a lot of these sort of alt-right grifters, people on the IDW, people like Dave Rubin, Ben Shapiro, Milo Yiannopoulos, it'll be interesting to see which sort of double down on the fascism, and which of them try to say, oh, I was never really into it in the first place. I just like Trump on policy, or whatever fucking nonsense.
I'm with you. Richard, what you got?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I had no idea. I wasn't even following the Milo deal, so I had no idea about the supposedly being ex-gay. I just couldn't. I can't even put that in words, honestly. The level of absurdity that is. But yeah. So the whole vegan thing. I don't really think it's so much about the aspect of her being a vegan as what her messaging and that, Nate, I was kind of thinking when you said, you hinted at the idea that the right wing doesn't have this back door to that market. I mean, honestly, I don't really think it's so much about that either. I mean, sure, she's probably trying to grift, but I think the point that's the ultimate we're trying to get at, that is these kind of things. What do we do about these sorts of things? You talk about cancel culture, which isn't really a thing. It's really just a matter of nobody owes you a platform here in the information space. So the concept of being canceled, I guess, is true in the sense, but it's really more or less everybody else's power to not pay attention to you. Also, and so that's kind of effectively what cancels most people, among other things, aside sexual assault and all the rest. But I honestly didn't really pay much attention to this lady, for the simple fact that I don't know that there's much that I could do to change people that share this kind of mindset. I mean, I got to the point of her talking about basically making a mockery of the whole George Floyd issue, and I kind of stopped, and I'm like, I've seen enough of that in the last year. But the fact that it's being, I guess, monetized is disgusting. But hopefully that lady is deplatformed, canceled in some relevant way. I mean, Stacey said hopefully they don't actually have a GoFundMe for this lady. And so I'm not going to give it any. I'm not going to give it any energy, because that just opens the door for things that are very draining and don't achieve my goal. Effectively, I want her not necessarily canceled, but all of us not paying her any mind is effectively going to cancel her. I can't really see her grift lasting very long among the vegan neo-libs and neocons.
The funny part is like, people like her last for a minute because as Americans, we love drama. We love conflict. Yeah, we are drawn to it.
Look at Trump.
That's why The Bachelorette is still going on to this day, because we love conflict. That's why the Kardashians are still famous, because we love conflict. I mean, it's just because that's what we're sucked into. Yeah. I mean, it's ridiculous. That's the stuff that's going to get the most media attention right now.
So something I kind of want to.
I mean, it also undermines the actual message. It takes away. It does distract from what people are actually trying to convey. Also, so I mean, it is a nuisance on some level.
Sure.
And regarding the cancel culture that Richard was talking about a little bit, so cancel culture does not work. It's been proven because the Morgan Wallen, I don't know who he is. I'm not a country music fan, but he said the N-word, and the record companies pulled his music off of their shelves and off of Apple and off of Spotify, and somehow he was able to still have the #1 album in the country that week. Like it
just draws more attention to it.
Yeah.
I mean, I also think with deranged and insane people like the vegan teacher, and Milo Yiannopoulos and all these other sort of conservative grifters who peddle this sort of extreme nonsense. The algorithms of large social media platforms like Facebook and YouTube and TikTok and et cetera, they reward that. They reward content that draws people's attention because it elicits an emotional response, and it's good for ad revenue.
Yeah, exactly. What's going to keep your eyeballs glued to whatever the algorithm is going to feed you next? Yeah, pretty much. I mean, that's the dangerous thing about TikTok in a way, is that that's essentially what it's built around. It's literally an endless feed. I mean, even Netflix and many other applications are doing it. They just constantly spam you. They don't even give you the option to stop unless you literally move off the platform or something else. So, yeah, it's very effective psychologically. And that's one of the dangers, I guess, of social media on some level, is that people get stuck in these
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Are you finished?
Yeah, go ahead.
And let's not confuse, like the Dr. Seuss thing. The company decided to take some books that had race and no longer publish it. They weren't canceled. Or like the Potato Head, they decided to change the name to Potato Head. You can still get Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head. The companies decided to do these things so they could hopefully they could get to a broader audience and say, hey, we've done some things we shouldn't have, and let's change some stuff to get a broader audience or more consumers.
I think more broad
capitalism.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Sorry, say that again.
It's capitalism.
Oh, I was just about to say basically that. I think basically the problem is, we allow the flow of information to be controlled, by the people who push information. People's engagement on Facebook is intrinsically linked to the content that they get fed. That's a real problem when that's in the hands of unaccountable corporate monopolies like Facebook and YouTube and all of that. So they need to be broken up.
Broken up how?
By antitrust.
Yeah, can you clarify on that actually?
Well, because they engage in monopolistic business practices, and so the antitrust laws can be used to break up companies that engage in monopolistic and anti-competitive business practices.
So you're talking about breaking down YouTube into different categories or something like that?
Yeah, stuff like that. Yeah.
But what's to stop them from getting larger then?
Using antitrust to prevent it.
So wouldn't that actually kind of defeat the whole purpose of an incentive? If you have something that works, if you have a commodity that works, why would you want to slow that down?
But it's not working very well for the majority of people. That's the point of antitrust law. These corporate monopolies are really bad.
It's obviously working. Facebook is one of the most profitable companies. I mean, we don't have to agree.
No, I said for the majority of people. That's the point of antitrust law.
So monopolies are really hard to fight with the antitrust law because you have to prove. So it's not illegal to have a monopoly in America. It's just illegal to deliberately try to keep your monopoly.
Well, it until the Reagan administration, actually, there was relatively strict. Well, there was much stricter anyway, anti-monopoly law. But of course, crooked Ronald Reagan rolled all that back.
Yeah. The biggest one that I can think of in recent memory was the Microsoft antitrust suit, where they were able to say that Microsoft deliberately said that you weren't allowed to use Microsoft Office or Netscape and all these programs that they offered unless you bought a Microsoft computer. And then they went even further to say that they would give companies benefits to offer Microsoft software on those computers as a way to get people to just buy their computers.
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's just blatant manipulation of the marketplace using just their size as a company, as opposed to like the actual goodness of the product. It's just blatantly monopolistic behavior.
Well, iPhone did the same thing for the longest time. As a matter of
Yep,
fact,
they did.
but now they've changed because they've seen that there's actually more profit in regards to allowing you to stream and utilize other platforms. Though that's the beautiful thing about the marketplace is that anytime they feel like something's not working anymore, they can adapt and overcome that. I mean, yeah, we can talk about how people are too big, but the beautiful thing about stuff like this is that you create a commodity that can actually supersede and actually do better than what's already out there. You've created something that people will start using more often, and that's the beautiful thing about it. And I get it. There are certain companies out there we don't like because they're too powerful, and I agree. We could try to find a way to make it to where they don't have so much sway. But it's just that's a whole other topic anyway. We're kind of diverging away.
If we're talking about like the production of iPhones, then we're no longer talking about the use of antitrust to break up tech monopolies and their control of information.
Okay.
It's a completely separate topic. I just think that so they used to have like this kind of law in like broadcast media as well. Anyway, yeah, we can continue.
Yeah.
This would be a good segue into the Pepe Le Pew.
Yeah, I was going to say
I
that.
want to know what everybody's
Pepe
thoughts
Le Pew.
on what that removing him from the Warner Brothers movie. So
They made that decision, so.
So what is Pepe Le Pew's? I forget the cat that he chases around's name, but his
Penelope
the cat, right?
Yeah.
So his whole identity in Looney Tunes is that he chases that cat around and he doesn't accept no for an answer, right? So I could see why, so you could say, okay, we'll keep Pepe Le Pew in the movie, but what identity does he have other than being a skunk? He chases the cat around and said, he's like all over her, trying to kiss her and stuff. She doesn't want it. And it's basically, if you think about it, it is normalizing rape culture in a way, in an animated format that our kids consume. So that's just kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know much about what Pepe Le Pew is. Presumably, I said in the in our little group chat earlier, he's the latest victim of the right wing, of the latest right wing victim in the culture war and blah blah blah. Another victim of cancel culture, whatever fucking nonsense. I mean, it's all just like right wing aggrievement about like not being able to say the N-word on TV anymore, and that's basically all this kind of stuff boils down to.
Now, to clarify, in the movie scene originally, what was supposed to happen is he was supposed to be a bartender, and an actress hit on her and grabs her and starts trying to kiss her, and she throws a drinks at him, and his chair goes spinning. And he spins into, it was LeBron James, I believe, is in the movie, and Bugs Bunny. And they ask, well, we're looking for, I know where she is, but she has a restraining order or something on me. But LeBron stops him and talks about how you can't just grab women and it's about consent and stuff. So it was supposed to be a really good learning moment in the movie where he terms with his actions of the past.
Once again, the company made the decision. Nobody forced them to make that decision, but they just felt that this was appropriate. Pepe Le Pew is still a part of the Warner Brothers cast. If they decide to change how Pepe Le Pew acts like from now on, if they continue to do more cartoons, that's entirely up to them. But again, that's all about like the marketplace going into there. I see why people would be offended by the concept of him like putting himself all over the cat. I get that. Completely understand where people are coming from. Again, that's kind of like where parenting is involved too, where the parents need to get involved, because it's kind of like when kids play video games, violent video games, right? And some parents don't talk to their kids about stuff like this. And going back to that human trafficking rally I talked about, the average age that a child has access to pornography is 11, because everyone's got a cell phone, right? And she says the sooner that a parent talks to their child about sex, the better. And because everything they see, like an 11-year-old child that picks up the phone, they're going to think that this is exactly how you're supposed to do things like that. And they're supposed to say, this is not reality. This is 100% fantasy right here. You don't do this to women. You don't do this to men, whatever your fancy might be. So again, it really kind of comes into play about, you know, what the parents are doing. Now, it's easy for me to say because I'm not a parent, right? But what's that? I'm sorry.
Oh no! Continue, and then I'll chime in.
I'm just simply saying, it's like, even though parents can't be there 24/7, if they see their children doing something, they say, "Well, I learned from TV." That's where you gotta stop it, like right there, and say, "Listen, you can't do that. That's not okay." I mean, because I had the problem when I was a kid. I did something because I loved Calvin and Hobbes, so I started doing Calvin and Hobbes things, like, you know, throwing the rock at Susie Durkins, throwing a rock at my sister, kind of deal. You know, it's because I learned it from Calvin and Hobbes, but my parents put a stop to that. I mean, for some people it's easier said than done, but that's what I firmly believe in. But anyway, please continue.
So two things. Mm-hmm. So it's not like Looney Tunes is South Park. So it's not like this cartoon is made specifically for adults, where, hey, you know, if I catch my kid watching it, then we have a discussion. Looney Tunes is made for kids. And then my other thing was, so Amanda had said something. She said that she chases him when she couldn't smell him, but I don't know that kids can really understand that message. That maybe they can. Maybe I'm not giving them enough credit. I don't know. And then really, if you go back, you know, I was talking about this with some people earlier. If you go back, there's a lot of racism in like Looney Tunes, Disney, just blatant racism. So. And I realize they've moved past that since then, but it's, you know, Don had said, you know, Speedy Gonzalez better watch his back. Absolutely. You know, that is blatantly racist. So
yeah, I think actually Matt made a pretty decent comment there. Like, it could actually be much ado about nothing, because it could just be something that they decided to take out in the cutting process.
Yes, I was going to mention
in the cutting room floor. I think,
it was asked. Yes, the scene was just cut out completely. He only had one scene, and they just cut the scene out. So
yeah, yep. I mean, actually, to be fair, I'm actually more inclined to believe that than anything else.
They made the decision, so they got ahead of it. It's the free market that decided it, and it wasn't anybody else that forced them to do it. They just went with it, and you know what? They're probably going to make more money for that. Now people are going to give them more credit for it too. So I mean, go for it. So
I like that they did it on their own, and it wasn't something that was pushed on them by society. It was, hey, you know, it was kind of it was something that they were able to come to terms with on their own recognition. It's actually, you know, good on them. So
she's back.
Does anybody else have anything that they want to weigh in on the Pepe Le Pew front? I mean, there's a lot. Like, if we reevaluate, you can't rewrite history, right? No, absolutely not. But you can say, okay, like with the Dr. Seuss books, Destiny had said they're not taking the books away. What they're doing is they're just not going to sell these books anymore. And it's an acknowledgement by the company to say, hey, you know, in our past, we had some racist things out there. You know, I'd like to see Disney do the same thing. You know, on the racist cartoon clip that I was seeing earlier, if you go back and you watch Peter Pan, there's a very, very racist scene from Peter Pan where they talk about how Native Americans got their red skin. And it's, you know, it's time to move forward as a society, acknowledge these things happen, and do our best not to have it happen again. And instead of doubling down on something and saying, oh my God, they're canceling everything. It's about living in a society where everybody can feel like they're equal. So.
And I did see an article earlier that Disney Plus has removed Peter Pan and Dumbo from the kids' access, so kids cannot act. But I still feel that's a little too little. There needs to be some kind of warning, at least for the movie, that there's some racist undertones to these movies.
Lady and the Tramp 2. Like, I know that one's probably going to get up on the cutting board too, actually. So
the cats. Yeah.
Yep, the Siamese cats, absolutely. You know,
Yeah.
the only thing is like I get why this is happening, but you know, where does it stop? Honestly, I mean that's the only question is because in some way, shape, or form, it doesn't matter. Somebody is going to find something wrong with, let's say, for example, um, The Lion King or something like that, where they're going to like maybe make it to where Timon is making fun of people dressed up in drag, make it seem like it's a mockery. I mean, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but somebody could actually interpret it that way. I'm just asking, is that going to be next, though? I mean, I'm just playing devil's advocate in that regard. So,
And that's why I believe there should be like they took away the Nobel Peace Prize, or yeah, it was I think that for the laureate because of her racist context in the books, and I don't believe they should do that. You need to at least have some kind of warning that in the past people viewed people differently, so her books will have some racism in them, or the movies, have something before there is some questionable things in this movie that you may need to talk about with younger people or people that may not understand why some of the things in the movie are wrong.
and which one was this again? I might have missed that part. So,
Laura Ingalls Wilder, they took away the prize for good books. I can't think of what it is right now.
okay, I missed the book. So, okay, so
Is it the Pulitzer Prize?
I think the Pulitzer is
not
for
sure.
I think the Pulitzer is for journalism.
the
I could be wrong.
Pulitzer for journalism, yeah.
Okay.
So, but anyway,
Yeah, it could be like the Nobel Prize for Literature or something that, something like that. I don't really know.
Something like that.
laureate, I can't remember. So,
I don't know either.
Laura,
Yeah.
I just read a book if I like it, and I don't care if it has an award or not.
but then there are some books which are actually educational in a way, that there's things wrong. What's it, To Kill a Mockingbird? They went after that book. They read the book. It's educational of that.
It's my favorite movie of all time, honestly. I love that movie because Atticus Finch has been rated AFI's #1 best protagonist because, he didn't have any special powers. He just stood for what was right, and I love that, It's just, they were talking about getting rid of Mark Twain books because it was offensive, but it was literature. I mean, stuff like that is different because, usually 5-year-old children don't read stuff like that. But again, that's kind of like where the parenting comes involved. Where parents have to be able to explain this stuff, coherently. But I think sometimes some people are just a little uncomfortable having to explain this stuff. And they might think, oh, this is just kind of pedestrian. Why should I have to explain something like this? Well, there's a reason you should explain it because, just because you may not find it necessarily offensive, that doesn't mean somebody else won't, really. So,
I mean, how about 200 years of systemic violence and institutional racism? Could be a reason.
And we also need to face facts. Not all parents are going to educate their kids on it. They're either going to ignore it or they're going to further it.
Mm-hmm.
So Jan brought up a good point. They didn't get rid of those books. That occurred because parents didn't want to want their kids having conversations about bigotry. So it sucks that you got to have hard discussions with your kid. Ultimately, though, you shouldn't have become a parent if you can't parent your kids, right? Like, these are things that happened in our country. It is the history, and literature is one of the best ways of teaching people about the history that our country went through. And it was required reading when I was in school to read To Kill a Mockingbird and The Color Purple, and other books that taught about suffrage, and injustice.
Well,
sorry, go on.
yeah, I just want to say, I wouldn't, I don't know that that's necessarily true anymore. In the information age, the fact is, a lot of literature really isn't relevant anymore because you could all get it digitally.
True.
There's podcasts, there's ebooks. Most people, at least a lot of people, learn visually, and so it's or audibly, and so it's just simply easier for a person to absorb the content of a book that's expressed in a podcast that simply covers all the topics of the book in a way that the person can understand. And so it's just easier. You can do other things. And so it's not like the good old days where you go into your your study and you light your candle and you pull out your dusty old book from the shelf that you like. But yeah, certainly, Pepe Le Pew. I mean, I'm old enough to where they were still actually playing that pretty regularly when I was a kid on TV. So, I caught some of it as a kid. I really didn't understand it. I just thought, I was like, yeah, this is just weird. This, I just never understood. It's like, well, he chases the damn, skunk or cat around and just gets rejected the whole time. And well, most of the time it was, you would see the, because it's a cartoon and it's like you see the skunk smell coming up, and that's when she would kind of like back up. It wasn't really, it almost was like, well, is she really backing up because of the smell, or is it she doesn't really want to be kissed, or what is, so I didn't even pick up on any of that until I was really old enough to understand that myself. But yeah, no loss for me personally. My kids have not seen Pepe Le Pew. So yeah, it's really no loss for me. But yeah, certainly it's in today's age, that's the other issue. Things come to attention so much more quickly. Think if we tried canceling Pepe Le Pew 25 years ago, when we only had the TV and the radio primarily and telephone to communicate, it probably would have taken a lot longer for Pepe Le Pew to get canceled, except for overnight, essentially, like what happened. But the good news is their companies are taking it upon themselves to do this. It's not like you said, Justin, society isn't forcing this on them. It's really a moment of self-reflection and saying, well, maybe this could potentially be sending the wrong message. And so that, it has to start somewhere. It has to start from within, ideally. And so it's great that they're making those strides. And, as far as the literature, a lot of the literature is still preserved in many ways. You might have to pay top dollar for some of that literature now, but you can still get your hands on most of what you want to learn about the world if you can't get it through the information space. So yeah, I think it is a little bit overreactionary. The whole burning of books concept, people kind of panic about that, but there's really no burning of books, especially now. Information is just so easy to preserve on so many different levels. It just makes it easier. So anyway, yeah, screw Pepe Le Pew. No loss to me. He seems to be a misogynistic douchebag anyway. None of the men in my circle I know are chasing women down the street and forcibly jumping on them and grabbing on them. I know I'm certainly not, and I know I certainly don't condone or encourage any other man to do so. So yeah, just on that message alone, I'm perfectly fine with never or anybody else seeing Pepe Le Pew chase down the cat ever again. So, anyway, I guess one more thing. Our generation and my kids' generation probably really doesn't care or will never care about those cartoons in the way that we did anyway. So now it's going to be Rick and Morty and shit like that. So
yeah, it's all a bunch of boomers freaking out.
Stick to Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers is always better. So I love Mr. Rogers.
Does anybody remember Reading Rainbow?
Oh yeah.
Take a look.
It's kind of funny you brought that up because I actually got an autograph from LeVar Burton, and I'd always wanted to tell him how much I loved Reading Rainbow, but I froze up. I'm like,
oh man.
So it's just, but like honestly, Reading Rainbow is the reason why I got into books so much, and I completely blew that opportunity right there. I still have it though. I mean, a very nice guy, but oh god. I saw the question that I think Amanda asked. What about American History X?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that.
I think American History X needs to be viewed because it's an uncomfortable truth, because that's what happens in society to this day. And it's not something that should be celebrated. It's something that, because by the end, he explains to, spoilers, Danny, why it's all bullshit, honestly. Yeah. So it's just, it's uncomfortable to watch these things. It's uncomfortable to watch him curb stomp the guy. It's uncomfortable to watch him to get, prison raped. But the thing is, this is a reality right here. Stuff like this is thought-provoking, and it's stuff that we have to observe. And it's not promoting it; it's actually educating. Honestly,
Right.
I mean, yeah, granted,
I think it's
Hollywood,
both.
so, but it's just it's uncomfortable to watch. But at the lesson at the end of the movie goes to show that hate breeds hate. Essentially, that's essentially what the movie does. It's just it's thought-provoking though. So anyway, I'm sorry.
I mean, I think it's both awful and educational. I mean, there's no reason for there to be an or.
I mean, and that's so. What movies like that do is they, like Alex said, it's thought provoking. It makes you think, and it makes you realize that there's people like that really in the world. And it can be awful and educational. I mean, Schindler's List is a great example of an awful movie, but it's educational and everybody should watch it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think like something like that will ever be taken away because of the underlying message.
Mm-hmm.
It's not.
I hope not.
It's not teaching people to be like for American History X. It's not teaching people to be racist. It's saying this is what happens, and there's an underlying message of it's wrong ultimately. Like you said, hate breeds hate, and then same thing with Schindler's List. It's not a anti-Semitic movie. It's a movie about history.
Yeah, it's not indoctrinal.
Right. It's not out there. You know, they're not on a soapbox saying, "Oh, go be racist." They're saying, you know.
So on the Laura Ingalls Wilder, the American Library Association actually changed the name of the Laura Ingalls Wilder Award to the Children's Literature Legacy Award.
Dun dun dun.
I'm sorry. What was that? I'm sorry.
That was about. I think that was about the Nobel Prize in literature or something, wasn't it?
What was the book?
Laura Ingalls Wilder used to have the Laura Ingalls Wilder Award that they awarded books, but the American Library Association changed the name to the Children's Literature Legacy Award. Let's change the name.
Tongue twister.
Yeah, I think they could have made that easier.
So, and then before we move on to the next topic, and I am delaying a little bit so I can give Sean some time to get here.
Okay.
But the next, so somebody, I think it was Dawn, said, let me find it. How does this compare with video games?
He's bringing up video games. I'm getting triggered over here.
I'll go after you, Stacey.
So, well, how do you? I mean, in some ways, you could argue that video games are more engaging than movies and books and cartoons because you're actually kind of submersing yourself into the game. That being said, you know, I wouldn't want my son playing Grand Theft Auto for sure, or even Call of Duty, but I do let him play semi games he probably shouldn't play, but I also have conversations with him about it and make him understand it's just a video game.
That's the difference.
Yeah, just that's what it is. It's just teach your kids, like, you know, that like in this video game you can do things like, you know, pay a hooker and then run her over and get your money back. Great financial advice I learned from GTA. Works every time.
And the cops do come after you.
Eventually,
No,
don't go. But look,
you
can't use life codes. Yeah, you can't. You can't use life hacks. Okay, like, you can't all of a sudden play Sims and then get like $2 million. That's not happening. So it's just sitting down and talking and saying, hey, you can, first of all, knowing the child if they're old enough. As a parent, I think a lot of times if you want to look into video games, as someone who's obviously a gamer, I recommend going on Twitch and YouTube, looking up the game and watching the gameplay and determining from there if you feel it's good enough. Personally, I think if you have a kid, and you should go onto the kids' YouTube channel and look up video games and see what they're playing, those kids, because obviously there's a restriction on there.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to have the Minecrafts and the Fortnites, the Gearbox. They're going to have that for like more of like the underage. But once you get into like 13 and 14, obviously they're going to want to play COD, Call of Duty. and then maybe more of the shooters. So you just explain to them, hey, this is obviously. But most children, I don't know. I was never given the speech. I grew up on Zelda and
Yeah, I was
So
gonna say I'll help defend this, Stacy, because I know your intent is pure. So really, there's no,
Here it comes.
there's really no correlation between, well, first of all, correlation does not equal causation, and there's really no facts to support that there's a direct correlation between video games and children's behavior in any relevant way that could really substantiate the argument. But yeah, it's really as simple as just giving the kids a sort of reality check. And I'll even use myself an example. So my kids, they're limited to essentially ABC Mouse, which is an educational game, which is part of their learning process, and occasionally they get to play Roadblocks, which is an interactive online game. But yeah, there's different games for different age groups, and so obviously you're not gonna come home and give your 8-year-old kid Grand Theft Auto. That really doesn't make sense. The games are rated. They're rated for a reason.
Well, it's just like you would with a movie. Just treat it the exact same thing. You're not going to bring your 5-year-old. Some people, God forbid,
ideally that's not
treat
something
it the same
you're
thing.
going to do. But yeah, I grew up as a gamer. I playing GTA, Call of Duty, Zelda, and all the rest. It's never personally compelled me to want to go out and replicate that in any relevant way out in reality.
Not even the hooker part?
Well, for one, I'm a competent person that knows the consequences out here in reality, so I don't really have to worry about that. But really, the argument is how engaging the games are, and the stimulants and the things. So I would credit gaming almost entirely to things like my dexterity. My finger dexterity is incredible, for the simple fact that I spent so many years gaming on the PC and handheld, and so it stimulates the brain. It gets you to use parts of your mind that you don't otherwise use. So there are actually a lot of great benefits. But yeah, obviously you're going to tier that sort of thing. An 8-year-old, you're gonna go get them Crash Bandicoot, which is I forget what he is. I don't know if he's a hedgehog or what he is, but you're not going to go get him or her Grand Theft Auto. And I personally don't feel that there's a strong enough argument either way. But common sense would say, yeah, save that for when they're 16, 17, and they understand the consequences of reality a little bit better. But as a whole, I don't think video games are detrimental to children or adults in any relevant way. Are there one-off people or kids or teens out there that will try and replicate something out in reality? Absolutely. But I still don't think that's a strong enough argument to be made, specifically an indictment on video games alone.
It's a very poor argument when Japan and North Korea leads in gaming. Gaming.
Oh, sorry.
Market. Yeah, it's always a topic brought up. A lot of times, I think it's funny. Video games obviously cause violence, but then when you have South Korea and Japan leading the way in video game industry, billions and billions of dollars. It's kind of it becomes a poor argument then when it's like, why aren't they having the same issues?
I think one of the major problems actually in the I'm here. I've been waiting to say this. I think one of the major problems actually in gaming actually is like the reinforcement of society's perceptions of itself. So, for instance, in the new, I think it's in the Call of Duty. I think it's in the new Black Ops or something.
Cold
You're
War,
sent
probably.
on. Cold War, yeah, that's the one. You're sent on like a mission by like Ronald Reagan to protect the free world, and you're given like absolute, impunity to do whatever the fuck it takes, and just like the classic sort of like,
Yeah.
America good guy kind of thing. Well, if a parent is, if a parent who believes that Ronald Reagan was a good guy isn't going to be sitting down with their kids telling him what a monster Ronald Reagan actually was. But these kinds of like myths about how wonderful Ronald Reagan was and how his farts smell like roses, these are perpetuated, by video games and movies a lot of the time, actually, which the American intelligence agencies actually fund the development of. They actually place propaganda in them. And there was one other game as well. I can't remember which it was, but there was a war crime that the US committed in Iraq called, I think it was in Iraq, and it was called the Valley of Death. But I believe it was in a Call of Duty game. The same scene was depicted, but it was the Russians committing it. In other words, it's a complete reversal of the. In other words, it's a complete reversal of the actual truth that actually happened, and it sort of reinforces.
That was modern
warfare.
warfare.
It's probably modern warfare.
Yeah,
you had to go into a
almost all
airport
the
and
Call
shoot.
of Duties are based on some altered story of an actual conflict or set of supposed conflicts. I mean, there's some fantasy mixed in, obviously, but yeah.
That's the point. That's the point, because like it's trying to it's trying to make that fiction real. It is propagandistic.
Yeah, I could agree with that. I mean, there is some
no matter what
propaganda in there.
Everyone's the enemy except for the Americans, obviously.
So, when
I guess that
go ahead. Sorry.
Gears into our next topic, which is I guess if you want to move on to that.
Video game. I was going to move. I have to wait on the video game, because if not, I was going to lose my mind. So.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I've been playing video games for years. Okay, years upon years. I remember playing Mortal Kombat, on the Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and stuff like that. That's how far back it goes, right? So when it comes down to it, it's all about, once again, it goes into parity, because even in the 80s they blamed Judas Priest for the high suicide rate. In the 90s they blamed Beavis and Butthead for people causing mass destruction in schools and stuff like that. The thing is like, we as a society have allowed, in some cases, the entertainment industry to raise children, which is a huge problem right here. And when it comes down to the violent content of video games, that's not the only thing you have to worry about, though, as a parent. You also have to worry about the people that your children are going to be playing with, because there are some vulgar people that will send out death threats to your children, and it will affect them. But of course, then you've got children that are spoiled brats that when they lose a game, they start throwing a tantrum, and the parents don't know how to control that. That's really where parenting really comes into play. And once again, I'm not a parent, but I've seen enough examples of this, and I know plenty of people that have kids that play video games, and I've seen what happens if you let your children just run wild. You never ever let the entertainment industry, it doesn't matter whether it's a stand-up comic or it's a violent movie, a video game or whatnot, you have to be aware. And I think Stacy made a great point. Have them watch Twitch. Have them watch the content they're getting into, and be the parent to say, you know what, you're not going to play this, okay? Once you've proven that you can be responsible and mature enough, then absolutely. I mean, that's where parenting comes into play. But when it comes down to the whole video game bit about, like, the whole propaganda piece right here, okay? Well, obviously, in the United States, they're always going to make, the Americans be the good guys. But at the same time, though, Call of Duty 2, they turned out that there was a huge plot in order to make the Russians turn against the Americans, because an American turned against his own country. So it's not always the case, really. But I think when it comes down to Reagan, it's just, yes, some people hold Reagan up in a very big limelight, but that's a whole nother topic right there. I'm not a Reagan fan. Honestly, Reagan wouldn't get elected today, honestly. I don't even think the GOP would elect him today.
Don't worry, I will be talking about Reagan soon enough.
No, go for it.
So we're gonna wait till Sean's here to cover that topic.
Okay.
But no, I mean, I like I said, obviously, there is some onus on the parent to be able to parse some of these things, and obviously, you can't account for all the parents who are willfully ignorant or just don't care.
Mhm.
You know, I'm certainly not that kind. You know, it's obviously very important for you to monitor what children under the age of 18 are doing in the information space for so many reasons. You know, even it's just nothing. It's just not comparable to even our generation. You know,
Yep.
when early on, well, you know, if we're playing Super Mario, there is no online interaction. It's just you, and Super Mario. That's it. And there's, you know, obviously there's not, you know, if you consider jumping on, you know, Goombas violent, then don't have your kid play Super Mario.
Oh, these children don't know GoldenEye though. These children don't know GoldenEye. Oof, that's old school right there.
Great game.
But yeah, you know,
And we could.
Oh, go ahead, Destiny. All yours.
I'm sorry. I was just gonna say we definitely. I think this would probably be a better for like a whole topic, but the toxicity of women in gaming and how they're treated.
Yeah,
that's another topic.
I think that would be a good
one.
one.
That's a very real thing. Yeah.
I think it's a lot better than what it used to be.
It is, but
a lot better.
Yeah. Anita Sarkeesian didn't make it better though.
No, fuck, I can't stand her. Like I would like wall. Shit. I'm glad she's out of the limelight. She was useless to the community. Fuck. I can fucking rant about that. I can't say the word, but it's a bad word, but it's a really bad word, but yeah.
I see what you're saying.
Oh, where'd Stacey go?
Uh-oh.
I take full responsibility.
I think her internet got canceled.
I take full responsibility.
She was like, I would like to say the really bad word, but it's a really bad word. And then they were like, no, you gotta go.
She had to say the word.
I'm just glad I'm not having internet issues tonight. It's so nice.
It's not internet. I hit the wrong tab, okay?
Yeah.
I have like 20 tabs
trying
open.
to cancel you.
Yeah.
So the next topic that we had for current events was of the Harry and Meghan situation, and that they are choosing to leave the royal family. It's been quite the hot topic in current events this week. So
I'm back just in time.
So this is my understanding. I don't watch a lot of news, but this is my understanding of the situation. The royal family is not pleased in who Harry chose to marry, and that her bloodline or whatever isn't of white descent, and that Meghan Markle comes from a family that is black. So my understanding is that they're very mad at Harry, and he said, you know what, screw you and all this. I'm out. She's who I married. Peace.
And fuck all of y'all.
I don't know the whole situation behind it. Like I said, I don't read a lot of news, but that's my understanding of it. And my understanding of history is that they are so concerned with their bloodlines that they actually used to marry within their families and reproduce that way.
Oh boy, do they need to study their bloodline?
So,
well, who
need to study their bloodline?
I mean,
Charlotte.
Sorry, go on.
No, you go ahead. I'm sorry.
All right. Well, I mean, the British Empire were like the original colonizers. Where do you think white supremacy comes from?
Amen.
I mean, it's
so
the one drop rule.
You started it all.
Yeah, I mean, obviously.
But
it's the one drop rule. That's what it is.
So what's the one drop rule?
That if you have one drop of black blood, then you're considered to be genetically inferior.
Well, they all do.
Yep.
Though.
And let's not.
They all do actually.
Not when you purify yourselves by inbreeding for generations upon generations.
They still got it though. I mean, even if you inbreed, you still got the genetics in there actually. I mean,
yeah, we all come from.
I never said it was like based in facts or anything.
I know, but it's just they're running away from their own history. Like this is something I learned about actually on CBS Nightly News. It's like what? It's like get out of here. But they're not taught this stuff though.
No, it's all very real. It's completely bizarre. I mean, you know, but people really like elites in this country really are that fucking demented.
when it comes down to the whole, like we started watching the interview with Harry and Meghan and Oprah. I got my own thing about Oprah, but anyway, so I think it's more interesting the fact that the royal family released a statement on this first, and they've released a statement on Prince Andrew's involvement with Jeffrey Epstein. I think I'm more surprised by that, actually, because he's got pictures of him with Jeffrey Epstein, with witnesses saying the things that he's done to these victims, and the royal family has done absolutely nothing to talk about that.
Yeah, funny how they're not talking about that in the press, isn't it?
Exactly. Right. I think that's more disingenuous, and I'm not discounting. I'm pretty sure. It was funny because John Oliver was talking about the situation that Meghan Markle was getting married into. He says he wouldn't. He's a commenter. He wouldn't get married into that royal family because he knows how much of a nightmare that actually is. But what's killing me about this situation is the fact that everyone's given Meghan and Harry grief. He's like, oh well, you had it all. You decided to leave it over a piece of ass. Harry has his own problems, right? Yes, he was a party boy, and yes, he wore the Nazi swastika as a joke, and it didn't go over well, but he's apologized for that. His mother died after his father was committing infidelity, so already he's in the press. 2, then he started becoming a party boy, and people are paying attention to that. He serves his country, does a couple tours, nobody knows about it until his unit comes under attack. Then he has to leave because it's leaked that he's in there. After he leaves the military, he starts Invictus, which is a Wounded Warrior Olympics, essentially. Basically, think of it like the disabled veterans. It's their version of the Olympics. He's the patriarch of that because he cares that much about the community. And he decides to leave because, his wife feels neglected. And it's not necessarily with the Queen, it was with other members of the royal family, essentially. I would say that's more respectable, honestly, because you're willing to throw your entire life away for somebody that you truly care about. And it's not like she's mind warping them. They've been married for a couple of years now. It's not like, they got married and 6 months later he's out the door. No, it's like this is something that's been happening over time. And she cleared up some of the rumors that's been said, and I'd say she's been pretty graceful about that. But I don't know enough about the situation, really. I think that, honestly, leave them the hell alone, because that's all they really want. They don't ask for attention, but the fact of the matter is, they're big figures right now. She's always going to be in the news because of the drama between her and her dad. He's always going to be in the news because he's of royal bloodline. It's just one mess after another. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Why do you apologize?
I think that
I talk a lot.
I think that she commits 2 major mistakes. The first one you can get away with as long as you don't do the second. The first one is that she doesn't fulfill the role that a traditional sort of princess would fill in a royal family, because they basically exist. I said this to Richard the other day. They basically exist to cut the ribbon at opening ceremony for a new building that's been erected in monument of some crusty old white dude. That's the role that a princess is supposed to fulfill in the royal family. But Diana didn't fill that role either. She went on tour in Angola, and she was, she drew attention to the landmines that had been put there partly by our allies, South Africa. And you're not supposed to do that because there are landmines, and that's going against the family. But you can kind of get away with that if you don't disobey the second rule, and that is that you have to be a white English woman. And Meghan Markle is neither of those 2 things, so that's unforgivable.
But it's okay for, is it Prince Andrew, to be a pedophile?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
You can't love your family. If you're going to disown any of your family, it shouldn't be because of who somebody in your family chooses to marry and who to have children with. It should be, if any reason to disown somebody, it'd be because they're a murderer or a pedophile.
But that's going against the family. That's going against the family. All the way all monarchies work is basically similar to a mafia. You don't go against the family. Because
they're chosen by God, right? Isn't that?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. The Queen is the head of the church in this country.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. It's just
Diana was a saint, in my honest opinion. I mean, am I wrong, Nate?
Oh, she's pretty good.
Yeah, okay. I wasn't sure if the laugh was like, "Oh, you don't know, you foolish American."
No, she was pretty good. As royals go, she was pretty good. I mean, like the media was pretty obsessed with her, like just absolutely like fawning. And, she was pretty good, but like the coverage was also just like complete. It was it wouldn't have been like unbecoming of like a North Korean dictator, frankly, the way that the press covered Diana.
Yeah. So who else?
yeah,
You got any more targets for me?
Yeah, why do you still have the royals? Can't you just say fuck off and get your own?
Yeah, we should have done the same thing that the French did.
Yeah, I don't understand why they're still around.
Here's my understanding of it. Correct me, Nate. Is they own the land even though they technically stole it, and then what happens is the government technically pays them in order for them to continue to be on that land. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it's
Something like that.
Like it's some weird feudal arrangement. Yeah. How is it still a thing? Corey says.
Good question.
Power and money. I mean,
I wish I could say I was surprised by the actions of the British Crown, but I'm not really. I would even say with Harry, I kind of watched a good chunk of that interview with, where Oprah interviewed them both, and it's I thought it was weird because it just appeared to me like it was more of so when you listen to Meghan speaking, it's almost as if it's more or less just most of the information that Harry has told her about that whole situation. I mean, I don't really know how, it seems like she really doesn't truly know. And then I got the impression kind of Harry was kind of not really doing the greatest job of defending her and calling out the Crown for the racist I'm not going to use any derogatory, but essentially the racist lunatics that they are. And the one drop rule, I would say it definitely probably still exists within the royal family. But that was honestly that you say they're ordained by God in many ways. That I guess that kind of leads into the next topic of the whole imperialism here in America, is that it was thought that we were ordained here to do many things in the name of God. And so
well, George Bush said that he talked to God.
Well,
I'm sure to the highest Father.
Yeah, I'm sure he did.
God.
Everyone of high power seems to have that ability.
Stacey, your question in the private chat: has anybody tried to kick out the royals? Yeah, like republicanism isn't very popular in England, but it is popular in like Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. But that vote doesn't really matter because this country is primarily run by like England, and that that's obviously by design. And Amanda was right. The royals don't really, in practice, they have like no political power whatsoever.
Yeah, that's why my understanding is that's how they have their money and power is literally by the land that they stole.
Oh yeah. Well, it's like our entire like business community. That's why we had an empire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't know if anybody else wants to weigh in on the whole Meghan thing, but obviously it's and the other thing, she was getting attacked from another angle too, in that she was, quote unquote, not black enough or whatever. It's just such a ridiculous thing to even say.
I don't understand that.
She's black, and so I can't. That infuriates me because I get a lot of the same treatment.
I've never understood that, honestly, because
it's infuriating. I sympathize I sympathize greatly with that aspect of it.
So like, there's a good friend of mine. You know, he's a Trumper, but he's also biracial, and he's been told that he's not really black. And I'm like, what does that mean even? He's like, I don't know what that means. It's like, what does it mean to be truly black? I mean, I'm not going to weigh in on that topic, but it's just like, you know, I have conversations with, you know, friends of mine that are black, and then when they get told, oh, you're not really black, it's like, what does that even mean? I mean, what's black enough? I mean, I'm not trying to be offensive. It's just like, what does that even mean?
Well, historically speaking, like whiteness has always been a really, really malleable term.
Yeah.
Like so, for instance, if you were like the member of like the Portuguese aristocracy in like in Brazil, for instance, you would be considered white, but the Irish, for a really long time, they weren't considered white, but they had a lighter skin color than the Portuguese would. So the whole concept of race is extremely malleable because it's completely artificial. It's primarily a social construct.
So yeah, okay. Next topic, I guess.
Well,
yeah, Justin, you're muted.
There's a lot of people that would tend to disagree with that, Nate, but for many reasons, not particularly.
Well, go on. What are they?
Well, I mean, think about it. It's easy to say that, but the fact is, I mean, the Republican Party and parts of the right wing are great examples of how that's really not quite the case. I mean, there is. I mean, it's malleable to an extent, but in other ways it's not. And it's kind of hard to parse there, but it's just.
Sorry.
I just want to say that. So, I've only ever gotten that really from Republicans. I've never gotten that from anybody else. So it's just a distinct targeting of, well, you don't look as white as I do, or you know what I mean. I'm white, and so I'm mixed, and so I guess I'm not. To them, I'm not what in their mind signifies a true black man. So it's a gray area because I'm not. I share that biracial texture, and so it's like it in their mind. I guess it gives them legitimacy to just undermine and not pay attention to some of the things I'm saying.
Look at Candace Owens, though. Look at her.
I mean, like the extreme right, they absolutely do believe in the absolutism of race, and furthermore, they believe that they believe that hierarchies based on race are real and they're justified. That's that's like a really important concept in white supremacy. The idea that race is actually a fixed thing. It's not until until the British Empire really that that slavery became primarily based on race, and it's also at the same time that race science and all this sort of pseudoscientific nonsense about genetic superiority sort of starts to exist. But the extreme right, the sort of crazy Republicans, they absolutely do believe in sort of racial absolutism, but they believe in a lot of crazy fucking nonsense.
Well, I mean, it's the entire premise here with Megan. I mean, it's an oversimplification to say the one drop rule, but that's literally, there's literally no other reasoning in their mind other than that their bloodline, for all intents and purposes, has been tainted, and so but anyway, it's just a disgusting event for both. I mean, I think Alex hit on it earlier. Megan and Harry both want to be left alone, but I don't really know much about Harry per se. I know actually Corey in the comments brought it up. He apparently was portrayed in a Nazi outfit or had the swastika donning at some point. I've never seen that, so I don't know.
He wore it to a party.
He was 20 years old.
Fucking genius.
Doesn't make it okay.
Yeah, I mean, I knew not to dress in Nazi uniforms when I was 20.
I'll just say people do some really stupid shit. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I've done some stupid shit. I've never worn Nazi paraphernalia, but just you know, people do stupid shit, especially when they're under the influence of alcohol. I mean, all of us that have ever gotten shit faced can all attest the fact that we do some really ridiculously bad things and make really bad decisions. But honestly, I'd say he's more than atoned for it. I'd say, especially with all the work that he's done with Invictus. I mean, I tell you, some of that stuff, it's given a lot of disabled veterans some hope. It really has. And, you know, I'm not trying to dismiss the whole wearing the swastika as a costume, like, for fun. But are you going to keep beating him down for that? Are you going to keep bringing up something that he did once?
I'm not beating him. I'm not beating him down for it, but for somebody that like I can't relate to a lot of, you know, and it's the equivalent of, it's not the exact same thing, but it's like when you see pictures of somebody that dressed up in blackface, it's like, what the fuck, you know?
Well, I mean, and Jay kind of just hit on it. Well, was he actually drunk when he made the decision? You know what I mean? That, you know,
yeah,
if anything, the alcohol just inspired him to, you know, to be more belligerent or ignorant. But
how do we know the costume wasn't there and he just put it on? That's the thing. We don't know. This is my entire point right here, though. Is like we're so quick to just destroy somebody over something they did years ago, and then we've seen destroying. Well, I'm not. You're saying you're destroying, but it's just like people want to just. That's the thing they're focused on right now. They're focused on the fact that he wore at a costume party. It's not exactly something you're supposed to do, but he was 20 at the time. I'm not saying I'm okay with it,
Alex. But let me tell you something. Mm-hmm. Something that, you know, in my life, I did a lot of stupid shit in my 20s. One thing I never did was, I never wore a Nazi uniform. I never pretended to be Hitler. I never wore blackface. Mm-hmm. Like these are things that I think, especially being a royal family, like, you know, like you're aware that, I mean, England has a history with Nazi Germany. Mm-hmm. It's, you know that that's not right, and it's not funny.
Of course, I'm not saying it is funny.
There was actually somebody who was in line to be the throne who was a Nazi sympathizer, but like what you said about, like, you know, was the Nazi uniform maybe just there at the party? Well, I've been to many parties, you know, never been to one with a Nazi uniform just lying around. But second of all, even if I did, I wouldn't think to put it on. But he also, like, owned up to it in the media. He said, "Yeah, I shouldn't have worn it." So,
I don't think he should be crucified for it, but I mean, acknowledge.
He should get crucified for it, though. People are already like, oh. But
well, he was at the time. It's coming back up now.
It's coming back up now, but it's just like, you know, and that's the thing that's just kind of dry. Like I said, I think he's done more than make up for it, but it's just, I look at it like this, though. People are never going to remember the good things you do. They're always going to remember your mistakes. That's the thing that people zero in on. That's one of the truest statements you'll ever hear.
So what my parents used to tell me is, like, they would say you can do a million things right, and it just takes one wrong to mess it all up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, wipe it all away. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think, you know, it's important what he's doing now, but it's also important to say, you know, when it's brought up, he shouldn't try to excuse the behavior. It's just about accountability, saying, "Hey, I was wrong. Shouldn't have done that. It was a dumb choice." And I think it's a little bit more than just being 20 and stupid. But at least he's tried to be accountable for it. And I don't know much about him either. But if what you guys are saying is true, that he's done a lot of good, I'll take your word for it.
Well, in the wise words of the Hound, fuck the crown.
He said, "Fuck the king."
And fuck the king. Yeah. Well, in this case, fuck the queen. But, you know. And fuck the crown.
Yeah.
Can we please go to the next topic?
Yeah, we can go to the next. So we're actually shifting gears out of current events. I don't know if Sean's going to join us tonight. I haven't heard back from him. So we can either do the private prison system or American imperialism first. Let me just make sure. Yeah, I don't know. I think he's tied up at work. Let's do the private prison system first, and then we'll do American imperialism, just in case he does get back in time. Okay. So I'm just going to do a brief introduction. I found Richard, Destiny, and myself all watched a documentary called 13th. And that's kind of what brought this topic about. So I found a good summary on the movie. Rather than put it in my own words, I'll just kind of read the summary. It'll take a few minutes, and then we'll discuss it. So it's more than just the private prison system. I don't know why I named it that, but that's what I named it. So here's the summary of the movie. And this was written by Odie Henderson. So when the 13th Amendment was ratified in 1865, its drafters left themselves a large, very exploitable loophole in the guise of an easily missed clause in its definition. That clause, which converts slavery from a legal business model to an equally legal method of punishment for criminals, is the subject of the Netflix documentary 13th. Premiering tonight, so it's talking about the premiere there. Then I'll get back into the movie. So 13th begins with an alarming statistic. 1 out of 4 African American males will serve prison time at one point in their lifetime. Our journey begins from there, with a slew of familiar and occasionally surprising talking heads filling the frame and providing information. DuVernay not only interviews liberal scholars and activists for the information, but also conservatives as well, such as Newt Gingrich and Grover Norquist. Each interviewee is shot in a location that invokes an industrial setting, which visually supports the theme of prison as a factory churning out free labor that the 13th Amendment supposedly dismantled when it abolished slavery. We're told that after the Civil War, the economy of the former Confederate States of America was decimated. Their primary source of income, slaves, were no longer obligated to line Southerners' pockets with their blood, sweat, and tears, unless, of course, they were criminals. So, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, reads the loophole in the law. In the first iteration of a Southern strategy, hundreds of newly emancipated slaves were re-enlisted into free legal servitude courtesy of minor or trumped-up charges. The duly convicted part may have been questionable, but by no means did it need to be justifiably proven. So begins a cycle that DuVernay examines in each of its evolving iterations. When one method of subservice-based terror falls out of favor, another takes its place. The list feels endless and includes lynching, Jim Crow, Nixon's presidential campaign, Reagan's war on drugs, Bill Clinton's 3 strikes and mandatory sentencing laws, and the current cash for prisoners model that generates millions for private bail and incarceration firms. The last item is a major point of discussion in 13th, when an on-screen graphic keeps tallying the number of prisoners in the system as years pass. Starting in the 1940s, the curve of the prisoner count graph begins rising slowly, though steeply. A meteoric rise began during the Civil Rights Movement and continued into the current day. As this statistic rises, so does the level of decimation of families of color. The stronger the protest for rights, the harder the system fights back. Against it with means of incarceration. Profit becomes the major byproduct of this cycle, with an organization called ALEC providing a scary, sinister influence on building laws that make its corporate members richer. Several times throughout 13th, there is a shock cut to the word criminal, which stands alone against a black background and is centered on the huge movie screen. It serves as a reminder that far too often people of color are seen as simply that, regardless of who they are. Starting with D.W. Griffith's The Birth of a Nation, DuVernay traces the myth of a scary black felon with supernatural levels of strength and deviant sexual potency, a myth designed to terrify the majority into believing that only white people were truly human and deserving of proper treatment. This dehumanization allowed for the acceptance of laws and ideas that had more than hint of bias. We see higher sentences given for crack versus cocaine and plea bargains accepted by innocent people too terrified to go to trial. We also learn that a troubling percentage of people remain in jail because they're too poor or they can't post their own bail. And regardless of your color, if you're a felon, you can no longer vote to change the laws that have unfairly prosecuted you. You lose a primary right all Americans have. 13th covers a lot of ground as it works its way to the current days of the Black Lives Matter movement and terrifying videos of the endless list of African Americans being shot by police or folks who supposedly stood their ground. On her journey to this point, DuVernay doesn't let either political party off the hook, nor does she ignore the fact that many people of color bought into the law and order philosophies that led to the current situation. We see Hillary Clinton talking about super predators and Donald Trump's full-page ad advocating death penalty for the Central Park Five, who, as a reminder, were all innocent. We also see people like African American Congressman Charlie Rangel, who originally was on board with the tough on crime laws President Clinton signed into law. So if you didn't watch the movie, basically it's a great synopsis. It's a great summary of American history and basically how after slavery ended, it still continued through mass incarceration, and then it goes through all the different laws that have been established through the years to mass incarcerate people. Mostly black men are the people that get mass incarcerated, and it was it was in the summary that I just read off, like the disproportionate sentencing between crack and cocaine. They talk about that. They talk about how in the early 20s and into the late 30s and 40s, black people were demonized within the film industry, and then they didn't actually talk about this in the documentary. It's just something that I happen to know on my own. Is like a lot of the reason why we have certain drug laws was because of they were determined to be, oh, that's a black person's drug versus that's a white person's drug. Like, so back in, I think it was the 20s or 30s, cocaine was still legal because that was determined to be a white person's drug, versus marijuana was illegal because it was determined to be a black person's drug. And when black people smoked marijuana, they would hallucinate, and then they would rape the white women. So I'm done with my piece. I don't know who wants to weigh in first, Destiny or Richard. But I thought it was a great documentary. It actually made me aware of a lot of stuff that I didn't know about. And I kind of was dismissive of the 94 crime bill prior to seeing that documentary. But when you see the statistics of leading up to the 94 crime bill and then what happens after, it's actually eye-opening. So, you know, the 94 crime bill incarcerated more people of color than Reagan and Nixon combined. Reagan had started cracking down, and they had the war on drugs, and Nixon was just super paranoid, and he thought that only hippies and communists and people of color used drugs. So that's his whole reasoning, because they were people that wouldn't vote for him. That's why he wanted to crack down on it. So it's a great documentary that kind of highlights the one of the many systemic racism problems in this country.
Well, I haven't seen it yet, so y'all can weigh in first. So,
well, Destiny, you want to go or?
Yeah, some things I want to touch on.
Sure.
There are a lot of companies that use prison labor to make products. So when you see made in America, maybe take a step back and think not necessarily a good thing, because what if it's somebody in prison making these things and they're getting paid sometimes nothing or very little, and then they have to pay for everything. So to make a phone call, they have to pay for basic needs like tampons for women or toothpaste. But when you're being paid so little and it takes you an entire day just to earn enough to make a phone call, we're doing something wrong. Just because they're a criminal doesn't mean they should be treated horribly like slaves.
That's exactly slave labor.
Well, so so you know, not just the documentary itself, but you know, if you go back in history and you look at the way that the system was designed, so at the time that they switched, and they added the loophole for slavery, you know, at early on, there actually wasn't a civil process for black people, meaning that if a white person in society thought you were doing something wrong or accused you of doing something wrong, you had no legal standing to defend yourself. You simply just I mean, there was just no precedent or there was no representation. So if you were accused of something, you were essentially guilty. And black people at that time, there was very likely they did not have any money to pay the fee or to avoid enslavement to begin with. So it was by design, and that's kind of how the loophole was so effective, because there wasn't any representation for black people in the first place. So that's why it worked so well. They could just simply throw them in jail, slap them with whatever charge they deemed necessary, and the white voice is all that mattered in society at that time. Women arguably were starting to have a voice there at that time, but yeah, for the most part, it was a white man's world completely. So I mean, even down to the roadways, the white wealthy people, they had horse-drawn carriages, or they were on it. They were actually before roadways. They actually had there weren't sidewalks. There were actually like platforms, and so you actually had to be white to walk on these platforms. All the women, I guess, and the black people, they had to walk in what they called the slum or whatever, is where people threw their pee out into the street and spit in the street, and so that's where all the dirty people were, which at the time was society primarily considered black people as the scum of society. So anyway, so that kind of explains how that started early on. But going up to the modern era, so the concept of reform itself almost seems to be a problem. So you mentioned Destiny. People, a lot of things they make in prison are actually there's a lot of things that they make in prison. The license plates were a big thing for a while, but part of the issue, right, is some of the reform actually we enacted is the reason why prisoners are getting paid now. There was demands. I forget what the doctrine is called, but basically the reason why prisoners now have unions and all the rest is all in direct result of reform. And just so it seems that reform doesn't appear effective. At least that it's just appears to be the case that the system can't actually be fixed in the way we can't get the justice system to do the things that we want it to do, no matter how many times we seem to make the attempt to reform it. And so it's complicated, but specifically with the issue of black people, there's just simply no question that the system has been horribly rigged against black people. The early example that I described is probably the worst case. I can't imagine not having legal representation or any of those things back then. And it still seems the case now. Justin, you hit on it. The fact is black people are more likely to be sentenced to higher sentences, longer sentences, and more harsh punishments. And that's also a direct result of the system and its leverage of leveraging black people as its foundation of wealth generation. And so I wonder if it's just better to abolish it altogether, and just simply come up with another way to determine or figure out a different way of executing this concept of justice, because it's every time we've tried to reform, it's often resulted in more suffering. It actually hasn't made the situation better, and so now we're here, we are again, we're back to demanding reform, and so what does that look like? What sort of reform could we apply that not only eliminates the disparity and discrimination against blacks, but there's also an argument for women in this regard, who often get tossed to the side as well, let alone black women. But so my view is it seems like there's just no other way except to abolish this and start fresh, because reform has often failed us. So I don't know how any of you feel about that, but that's my personal take on it. We could beat a dead horse about what we could do differently, but is there really an argument for just simply abolishing the system of incarceration and imprisonment altogether?
Yes.
So my thinking on that is certain things like you need to have prisons for, right? Like murder, pedophilia, rape, and then other things like drug crimes, a lot. This is the other problem that the documentary touched on was the abolishment of mental health hospitals. So a lot of people end up in prison now because they had mental health problems rather than getting rehabilitated and put back into society. And then so there's a lot more that we could do. It should be mental health. It should be drug rehabs for drug crimes. And I agree that, to some extent, yes, we should just abolish the criminal justice system altogether because it's racist and it's very classist. So if you see somebody that, probably, Donald Trump is going to be a good example coming up. He's not going to serve any jail time for probably tax evasion for many, many years. Jeffrey Epstein, he got a slap on the wrist when he got caught being a pedophile the first time. So it's just like if you're white, and especially if you're white and rich, it's almost like the laws don't apply to you, and it's not right.
There's a book on this actually called The Divide by Matt Taibbi, and he got into talking, looking at the criminal justice system after the financial crisis, and he basically asked the question like, how is it that like we don't put these, we don't put like white collar criminals who had just like melted down the entire global economy and like literally killed like thousands of people by forcing them, just creating massive amounts of destitution, just through performing like decades of crime and fraud. They get actually rewarded for all of that, but of course a black person smoking marijuana or something gets like 8 bazillion years in federal prison with no chance of parole because he's that's the real threat to society. And he went around asking, like, talking to federal prosecutors, and he basically he got the impression from them that like even in their mind they make the distinction between like between like who prison is for, like they would say words to the effect of, well, prison isn't really for white collar types. In other words, there's a certain class of people that belong in prison, and should be sent there. Sorry, go on.
So the last thing and then I'll just shut up. But the last thing that I want to talk about that the documentary highlighted is, so now the people that are kind of behind the scenes, like Alec, and the people that are pulling the strings behind the scenes, making these things happen, they're already looking at what they can do next to mass incarcerate people. So they see these criminal justice reform issues coming up, and what they're planning on doing now is mass incarcerating people who cross the border illegally. So undocumented immigrants, they're doing it already.
Yeah, well, I mean that's actually one of the major sources of their funding is incarcerating immigrants in private prisons. So this is just the concept of reform. That was a form, like for instance, that was a type of reform that was leveraged. And it's just totally wrong. It's not an effective way to. We're relying on deterrence and the idea that once the government or the court gets involved in that person's life, it's going to deter them enough that they won't do it again. And it's just simply, that's not effective either. So I mean, there just has to be another way. It can't be more of the same, because that's what's led to systematic racism and disparity in the first place. So it can't be some vanilla sort of reform, and we really have to game this out, because like you hit it on the head, Justin. I mean, the idea behind the 94 crime bill, it wasn't specifically to target black people, but that's the effect that it had. That's the effect it had. And that is a result of how the system is structured in the first place. So the bill was really already, in a sense, destined to fail on some level, and it's a result of this not gaming out reform in the ways that are irrelevant, because it just seems to fail every single time.
I think that when policies have like a clear and predictable outcome, I think it is actually reasonable to assume intent. So like with the crime bill, I think actually like it was probably pretty predictable that it would disproportionately target black people. So I don't think it would be unreasonable to assume like actually that was basically the intent. Somebody, Amanda said like no more qualified immunity. The incredible thing about qualified immunity is that it's actually like a legal doctrine that the courts have literally just made up out of whole cloth. Like it's completely and utterly invented. I just I just thought I'd point that out, because that's also completely fucking insane that the courts are literally able to vest police officers with, I mean, quite literally just the absolute right to murder people. I mean, it's fucking bonkers.
I think I'll, if it's okay, I'll go ahead and kind of weigh in. So, talking about private prisons and federal prisons was actually one of my topics when I first started my podcast, right? And I talked about the differences, the pros and the cons. When it comes down to the federal prisons, like some of the pros in regards to that is because like the guards receive a hell of a lot more training than the private industry guards. As a matter of fact, private industry guards receive half of the training that federal guards actually receive, and they're actually paid less in the private prison industry actually. And that's one thing that really takes into account, because if you don't have a sufficiently trained guard force inside of your prison system, you're going to have problems, right? Because you're not going to have a trained guard that's going to miss the key indicators. Because I don't know if y'all are familiar with this, but like I watched the 1978 Scared Straight movie. I honestly think that needs to be required watching in schools as well, because even though the prison system isn't exactly the same way, it's enough to probably, kind of just show kids what the prison system was like back then. But the problem is that when it comes down to prison, what people don't understand is like prison in itself is another culture. I've known people that have been released from prison, and they'll tell you it's a whole different culture. And it's not so much what the guards do see, it's what the guards don't see that you have to worry about, because there's gangs involved in there. If you don't stick to your own race, you're pretty much open prey, and you're going to be gang raped more commonly. That's one of the first things that you have to fix in there is the gang culture. There's actually some prisons in Russia actually where they don't allow gang activity whatsoever. Like they actually segregate you from people that you might be associated with. It's very painstaking, but it's something that they actually take great pains to do so, because when you find yourself in these systems of the prison system, and you find yourself associated with gangs, they know somebody on the outside that's going to take care of you, and you're just going to become a consistent part of the system, and you might end up back in the prison system all the way around. So the first thing you have to address in there is the culture in the prison system, and that requires a lot. I mean, this is not exactly something you can, not a hack job. This is like delicate surgery. You have to take apart bit by bit by bit. But the problem is though is that the private prison industry, the more prisoners they get, the more money they make. That is a problem. That is something that I will fully recognize and say that is a problem. There are, during the California wildfires, they were bringing private prison prisoners out there to put out the fires. and they're not even getting any time knocked off, which I think is wrong. I think it's criminal, honestly, to do stuff like that. These are issues that we need to address. As far as so how do you fix all these prisons? Well, first off, like I said, you have to fix the culture in the prisons first. For those that are like the really dangerous criminals, you need to take them to a completely separate prison, and you need to like keep them in a small cell with another cellmate for the rest of their life, or however long their sentence is, and just keep them under complete supervision, not have them any do like those menial tasks like we have them do all the time. But second off, there needs to be better rehabilitation to get to, because there's a lot of, you have to get to the root cause as to why somebody turned to crime. There's usually a big root cause. Maybe it's because they grew up poor and because crime is all they understood how to survive. There's a lot of root causes. And this comes into my final point right here. When I debated Big Mama Fascist, I talked about how you need to fix the infrastructure in the inner cities, because that's where a lot of prisoners come from, is from the inner cities. And I was told, well, that's not a real solution. Well, how is that not a real solution? I said that it is a solution because you have to fix the schools, you have to fix the communities, because the one thing that you'll notice, right, is if you go into the suburbs, what do you see? You see community centers, you see restaurants that are nicer quality, you see churches, you see, a lot of really good things out there. But when you go out into the projects, you go out into, and I'm not trying to denigrate anybody, but I'm just saying what you'll see. You'll see like a great example is off Jefferson Street in Detroit. You'll see gas stations, pawn shops, and you'll see bad choice, like communities, not community centers. You'll see hospitals that have terrible care because the funding's not into there, and you'll see like schools that are like with windows boarded up. But then next thing you know, you're in Grosse Pointe, and every lawn you see is like got cars that are worth like $40,000 a piece. It's all about values in a society and the lack of infrastructure that's going in to fix that society. That's where it really starts to get to the root cause of it. I mean, I'm speaking from one position right here, but this is an observation I've made over a great deal of study over a great period of time.
But part of that is more systemic racism, because you can talk about the predatory lending by banks, where if you had a certain zip code or if you lived in a certain area and you were a person of color, you couldn't get a loan from a bank to go get a house. It's literally the whole system needs to be redesigned.
There was sorry if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
Actually, with the financial crisis, there was actually the opposite thing happened, because they obviously like the redlining was a bit of a problem. We'll just say in the build up to the financial crisis, what was happening was banks and financial institutions were actively seeking out customers with bad credit, which predominantly is predominantly black people, right? It's quite disproportionate, and other like other ethnic minorities, and they were targeting them with like these fraudulent loans, and they were doing absolutely like no due diligence, because the banks weren't going to be the ones that were holding the bag when these mortgages got collapsed on, and they all ended up. The banks would create these like just absolutely ridiculous markets where they would bet against like their own products, betting that they would fail, and then when they did, of course, they all got bailed out, and none of the homeowners did.
And there's a lot that needs to be fixed there, but when it comes down to stuff like that, it's just, Elizabeth Warren has been talking about going after like people at Wells Fargo, but nothing ever happens about that, because that's the crony capitalism, not capitalism in general, but the crony capitalism that's involved in there, where the politicians and the big businesses are tied together, and that's a problem that needs to be fixed. That's another reason why we need to have term limits, because there doesn't need to be any more lobbyists involved to donate to your campaign. But again, that's the reason why I brought that whole issue up about like, fixing the infrastructure, because it doesn't matter if you're from the project of Detroit, or if you're from like the Appalachians of Kentucky. If you don't come from a good society, whether you're like white, black, Hispanic, or whatever, you're not going to function in society. And unfortunately, that demographic tends to fall on minorities, whether you're black or Hispanic and whatnot. And I think that's something that we definitely need to fix. But the problem is that's something that's going to take a great deal of time, honestly. And it's not because I have any doubts about, the citizens. It's just making sure that it follows through. I mean, you can't expect this to get fixed in about a year or two, honestly. That's just my personal opinion. I could be wrong. I would.
So one of the problems, I could be completely off base with this, but charter schools and magnet schools are a big problem. So rather than allocating funding within the schools and the public schools within certain districts, they put they have these these charter schools that go up, and basically it's almost like a private school where you can be selective about the students that go there, and it's what's her name? Shit, I forget
Betsy DeVos.
Betsy DeVos was a big proponent of that, and that in itself is a huge problem. That money should be going to fixing the schools within inner city communities rather than.
They're also very highly subsidized by the government.
Oh yeah,
these charter schools, it's another just massive upwards redistribution of wealth, where the poorest in society have to subsidize the lifestyles of lazy elites.
And let's not forget there's the 3-strike rule, which works against people. I mean, they could have minor charges, but that 3rd strike and you're done. There's no get on.
Yep.
So there are people that are in prison for such minor things, and they'll never get out. They're there for life.
And there's no programs after you're out of jail. Let's not forget that. Absolutely no way of the thing that. So obviously in Scandinavian countries, their jails are set up for reform. So to understand kind of what you did, and then here's an opportunity. Once you leave, you can get a degree while you're there. They provide plenty of education. They don't treat you to the, because you have to remember, this is fucking granted, these are, sometimes some people do terrible things, right? Obviously you beat your wife and stuff like that, but remember, a lot of these crimes are very petty, drug abuse, which personally I think obviously I'm for unlegalizing or decriminalizing all that. I think drugs should be legal. You should be able to do what the fuck you want with yourself. If you want to go have cocaine and hookers, go and do it, right?
Yeah.
So so first of all, I think once you remove that takes away so much. But regardless, till then, a lot of these jails are clearly set up for you to continue to either stay there or go back. There's no absolutely very small chance for you not to go back. So it's just it's clearly set up as a system to continue to constantly fail you and degrade you and put you to its lowest point. Which you shouldn't do that to humans. You need to obviously provide some kind of understanding and reasoning and say, okay, I'm going to give you obviously a chance to succeed in life, get you your second chance. But that obviously our system doesn't provide that. It's just set up for you to fail over and over again. And obviously for any human, if you constantly fail, you're going to feel the same thing. You're going to be like, okay, well, I'm not worth anything. Who do I give a shit to impress? I'm just going to go back to what I'm usually doing. Can't get a job because I'm a felon, because I had some weed on me. It's just a system set up for failure constantly.
Sorry, go ahead.
Just really quick. If you want to be really, if you want to really raise your blood pressure, Google the school to prison pipeline.
Yeah, I mean,
and we also got to remember
with the foster care system. When we discussed that, it was literally a system set up. It's setting up for these children to fail from day one, to just continue on and not provide any care even after they're 18. It's just fuck off, find your own way, and obviously they're going to be set up to eventually have to resort to crimes. So we've been doing that since the day a child was born.
Yeah. And that's a system that needs to get fixed. I mean, but the problem is, though, who are the people that are going to hold that system accountable? Though that's where it starts, though. I mean, because we could scream until we're blue in the face, but we're just peons, honestly. So it's the elected officials. That's again why we need to have term limits. I mean, if you're
Well,
not going to
and
fix this problem,
within the prison system, people that prove themselves to be valuable, they will find reasons to keep you here. You broke this rule, so we're going to keep you here.
Mhm.
Of course, they want to keep the productive people there because they're productive. So they just, it's an endless cycle that they're never going to get out of.
And then once you're on parole, once you get out, parole, like I know my cousin, he had he actually got a DUI when he was younger, and then he basically he had to get in a fight in prison because or in jail because it was basically like get your ass beat or fight back, and because he got in that fight, he had to go to prison. And since then, it's been like a reoccurring, and he's in California. It's been a reoccurring. He keeps going back. He keeps going back. He keeps going back because parole is like almost impossible to comply with.
Yeah.
Like if you're stuck in traffic and you don't get home on time, guess what? You're going back to prison. It doesn't matter that you had to go to work and you had to leave like a certain time. You know, traffic in California is unpredictable, but because you're late and you weren't back home by 7 p.m. exactly on the dot, guess what? You're going back to prison. It's
that's
messed up.
And that's why I keep talking about, fixing the culture inside of places like that. Like small time crimes, reformation is 100% like, I think like they make the excuse as to why they have these prisoners do these jobs, like making license plates is to give them these skills on the outside, but they're not able to practice those skills because you're not going to be able to work like in a DMV with those license plates because you're a felon right there. So I think if there are some criminals, there are some prisons out there that are actually they're very few. They never catch the press, but there are actually some prisons out there that actually help reform criminals and make them better citizens. But they are so few and far between because these success cases are so few and far between.
But I feel like that in itself is like, I feel like after you've served your debt to society, you should become like, I understand, okay, I committed a crime, I got to go to prison. Okay, I lose my civil rights, I lose this, I lose that. But once you've served your debt to society, once you've done probation, you've paid restitution, you've done your jail sentence, you've done everything that you're supposed to do, then should you not be given a second chance at life?
It depends on the crime, honestly.
One of the problems with those kinds of like like teach people work skills while they're in prison type of things is that very frequently when they get released, they're not eligible for the job that they're trained to do anyway because they've got a criminal record.
Mental health of it, being in prison, and they're not getting the kind of mental health help they need.
Again,
and then when they're done, they're tossed out, and when they have a mental health breakdown, nobody cares. They're just a criminal.
Again, culture. I keep bringing up the culture of the prisons. Like that's something that definitely has to change.
And then, oh, sorry, go ahead, Alex.
No, I'm sorry. All I was saying, the culture, the culture of the prison system has got to change because all we're doing is just like it's a turn and burn kind of like system right here.
Yeah, but because the jails failed, they have to resort to some kind of connection with others. So, I mean, it's going to continue to happen. Because I don't blame them. Who wants to be sitting there alone and like not having like any like human connection? Which I think actually isolation of prisoners. I obviously that's a form of torture, and that should be removed right away. You can't just isolate humans because they didn't do what you like. That's just like a disgusting way of like torturing people. It's so barbaric. If we're gonna go there, then just fucking continue to go on the shot collaring people next. Like so I don't blame the culture system, mostly because it's just because the system has forced people into that culture because it's not helping. The jail system is not helping people. So what are they going to do? They're going to turn to that, to people that they can actually rely on, because they clearly cannot rely on these, no offense, but a lot of these people that are watching over them in the prison system are kind of scummy and continue to do terrible things. So
That's
you can't
true.
rely on them. So who are you going to rely on? At least maybe potentially someone that would have your back more than the police officer that's, getting paid, going to get paid more if he, continues to add time on prisoners.
That's my whole entire point, though, because like that, and that's where it's a very, very time-consuming project actually to actually hold people accountable to a higher degree of standards, honestly, because like it's easier said than done, but it is possible. Like the one
It's
thing
like everyone else has done it, so it is clearly an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
We just refuse to do it because we don't want to spend money there.
Exactly, and that's the problem. Money is usually what it comes into, and people are lazy, honestly. And I'm talking about like just fixing that prison system. It's like, well, we've always done it like this, so why should we stop?
I don't think it's lazy. It works for them.
I think it probably requires more effort to keep it the way it is.
It's a system that works for those who are profiting off of it. It's not a lazy system.
Yeah.
Oh, look at that.
And they're not even making minimum wage in prison cents an hour, for the work they're doing. And of course, if we all of a sudden said, let's pay them at least minimum wage, it would, that people would suddenly realize how expensive it is to keep all these people in prison and pay them minimum wage.
And Destiny, you had showed a graphic earlier in the week that there's a lot of corporations that actually exploit that. Big corporations, like, I don't want to call them out by name because I don't know, like, actually, I'll do it. Like,
fucking do it.
One,
yeah, you get the lawsuit.
Bread, McDonald's. I mean, it's all public record. These companies will hire because they only got to pay them like $1 an hour to go to work.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, it's that's why I say the issue of reform, though, is so at one point prisoners weren't being paid at all. It was essentially a rally on the part of prisoners themselves to have this sort of thing put into place. They wanted, they demanded that they be able to form their own unions and all of those things. I mean, that's what sort of some of this reform has led to, and it's not. It hasn't been effective, and so what do you do about that fact? That every time we reform, it literally adds another layer to the problem. And I'm not sure it's so much that they're being lazy. It probably does work very well for them from a profit standpoint, but I just don't know how we don't move forward in the way of just starting essentially fresh. Of course, the violent people we do need to do something with, but like you said, all the people who have a felony or are in the 3-strike rule, for instance. I mean, they're spending the rest of their lives in jail for just nonsensical crimes. Yeah, it all for me boils down to it's not good enough to reform at this point. We have enough evidence to suggest that that's not the way to move forward. I mean, it might make some of the things better, but yeah, ultimately it's never going to end, because just the idea of imprisonment is just, it's not only undignifying, but it limits a person's liberties in a way that it just adds to this brokenness. That's why I don't think we'll never be able to fix this problem, because it's always going to come down to individual liberties and human rights, and a lot of that has to be violated in many ways to have an effective way of regulating society's most violent and dangerous people. So it's really a challenge, and I don't know how we do that through standard reform that we've been doing for the last 3 or 4 or 5 decades.
Well,
I mean,
okay, I'll go after you.
I was just going to say, yeah. I mean, systemic repression is by definition systemic, and it requires systems change to get rid of it. Anyway, go on, Alex.
The reason I said it was lazy, though, is because, I think Caleb was talking about last week tonight. They talked about how in the criminal justice system, there's actually times where the defendant won't even talk to the district attorney. The district attorney is going to talk to the public defender if they can't afford an attorney, and they're going to cut a deal about this person going to serve 2 years, because if they go to trial, they could serve up to 20 years in prison. So obviously they're going to take the deal right there. That's the laziness I'm talking about, though. It's the laziness essentially, like where, you know, they know what they need to do to make things better or to make things more functional in a prison. It's just people aren't enforcing it. We talk about all these reforms to fix, right? But the laziness, what I mean is nobody's following up on it. Everyone's just like, oh, well, you know, I've got the numbers right here and everything looks fine. No one's actually taken the time to go down and find out if this is true or not. That's where I'm talking about the whole laziness bit. It's because people aren't actually, they're just taking everything word of mouth, essentially. And that's what I'm talking about, though.
I mean, I think everyone knows. It's just it's a system that's fine for them. Like, why would you change your career if you're making a shit ton of money to end up losing like getting half the salary, right? Why would you work against yourself? And this, we've allowed the system, we've allowed these people to continue to do it. We know it's happening. We can't sit there and deny it. There's countless research behind that. So
we're lazy. That's why, because we're not going to hold.
It's not that.
We're not
lazy.
Maybe that's a bad term, but it's not lazy. They're making money off of it.
Public defenders are overworked. If you look at their caseloads and the amount of public defenders that they have to handle those caseloads, they are overworked. And if you look at the amount of people that need those public defenders,
think about the amount of effort it takes to keep arresting people like 8 million times in a row. That's quite a bit of effort.
Y'all are actually making my point, though. We keep making excuses about, like, well, we overwork the cops too, but we always say not to do absolutely everything.
But it's less effort to not do it.
Well, no, it's again, we're sending out the wrong people to handle these small situations. We send cops out to do everything in this country. It's because we're not actually willing to take the time to fix the problems. Like, for example, anytime there's a gentleman that has like a mental illness problem, they're supposed to send a social worker.
But why fix the problem if criminals?
Exactly.
Why would we care? That you have to realize that a lot of society, we don't care. They're just a common criminal. So why would we fight for reform for them? Why would we? They're just a criminal. There's that mindset in our society.
But you have to remember also the police and these incarceration systems are making a ton of money off of this. If we start removing their financing, then obviously they're going to make less salaries. They can't have overtime and all this stuff. So their thing, it's a business. And what is the one goal of every business? To stay in business. And that is what it's become.
So why aren't people going out of the way to fix it, though?
Defunding the police means just defunding the police just means funding everything else.
I'm not talking about like the people I'm talking about the people that know this is a problem, but they're not going out there to fix, like elected officials. They know this is a problem. Why aren't they going out to fix it?
Because they themselves make money.
They're in the pockets of the same elites that benefit from it.
Are they all?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, we can't know that for sure, but this is my whole entire point, though. I mean,
there's constantly police funding
I'll call it
parties.
Maybe not lazy. I'll call it complacency. We'll settle on that term, I guess. So, just we allow this to happen because this has become the norm. So,
and you have to. A lot of these prisoners are. I've talked to someone and they said the food that they're given is just horrible. There was one company where they found maggots in the food, and they're called loaves. It's basically a bunch of food like mushed together, and it's like a piece like a meatloaf, but it's horrible.
That's wrong.
Or it's outsourced and someone's making a shit ton of money off of it, just like they do with the military. No offense, but
yeah,
they outsource these. They outsource to their friends. Say, okay, well the food's going to cost this much. Okay, and they let it slide by, and then they give this shitty product while charging tons of money. It happens every time with contractors, which is something really the government needs to look into because they need to stop contracting.
That's why prisons shouldn't be privatized, because at the end of the day, what they're concerned about is the return on investment, the bottom line. How are you going to do that? Well, you're going to put as many people into a prison as possible. That's one way, because you're getting paid for those prisoners. B, you're going to give them shitty clothing. You're going to give them shitty food. You're going to charge them, like Destiny said earlier, I think it was like $15 a phone call. It's there's no place in our society for private prisons.
No.
That's one place that we can start, and then we need to revamp the whole fucking system, the way that it's designed. Cops should not be allowed to be judge, jury, and executioner. And now you'll even hear fucking people say, well, it's cheaper, it's less paperwork to kill somebody. Or I think I've heard something like that before. Like, it's less paperwork if a cop were to kill somebody than having to go to trial and do all, because they get away with it because of qualified immunity. So they can just say, oh, this and that, I felt threatened, and they get away with it. It's a slap on the wrist, and they're back on the police. They get a paid suspension for a couple of weeks, and then they're back on the police force. And it takes something like, even when we saw like George Floyd get fucking choked to death, there's still people trying to defend cops. Yeah, and it's indefensible. Anybody that saw that video can say that is indefensible. It should have never happened, but it's a societal problem.
So the funny part is I brought this situation up to many, many people, and each time I've been accused of hating the cops, which I don't. I don't hate the cops. I just hate bad cops. But I'll put it to you like this, okay? Derek Chauvin, before George Floyd, had 17 other counts of misconduct. 17. Now, that is preposterous. That is an insane amount of misconduct. Now, I don't care what it was. 17 counts of misconduct is 17 counts of misconduct. We don't even allow that in the military. If you have like a certain amount of counts of misconduct, you'll get processed out. It's usually up to the chain of command, but to me, that's ludicrous. And this is not like small-timey things. You've got people like Daniel Holtzclaw. Remember him? He was the Oklahoma police officer that was like sexually assaulting and raping women that he pulled over. Apparently, he'd been doing it for a long time, and people knew he was doing it, but they just didn't come forward about it. That's another problem that needs to definitely get fixed, is because, I mean, I get it, you want to look out for your buddies, but you've got to come forward. You got to fix that. It starts somewhere.
But the reason these kind of things happen, like the brutality of like this, like these sort of internal colonial police forces, which is essentially what these what a lot of police forces are in the United States. The violence and the systemic violence is the point. The repression is the point.
And let's not keep in mind, people, they're put in jail because of something, and then they have to fight the system just to get out of jail. There was I can't think of his name, the kid that they put in prison, and his choice was, you can wait for your case because you want to plead not guilty, or you can plead guilty and he chose to ride it out, and he wasn't guilty.
Mm-hmm.
He ended up being in prison for years, and then when he finally got out, he ended up committing suicide because he just couldn't handle it. It was too much. I mean, all that time fighting and guilty of anything.
And definitely, I mean, justice is not equal in the eyes of the law anymore. It really isn't.
It's never been equal, though.
It's never been equal now. Like, I'm pretty sure if I committed like an act of domestic violence right now, I mean, I'm never going to do that, obviously, but if I was to do it right now, I would get the book thrown on me, and I deserve it. There are some people in positions of power that if they do the same thing, because they've got good attorneys, they might get a slap on the wrist and then do probation.
But this is part of the problem, though. Like, so you could commit a violent crime, and you could, depending on what the crime was, you could walk away with probation, versus somebody that is like a black person. If they commit a violent crime, they're going to prison. It's so you have like it's unequally applied. I kind of agree with Richard. I think the whole system needs to be torn down and rebuilt. We obviously need to have prisons for the most violent people in our society. But other than that, it should be rehabilitation of some sort of form. So if you commit theft, I'm sure there's some way that you could I'm sure there's a better punishment than sending somebody to prison. If say you stole a car because you were young and stupid, you stole a car. So I'm sure there's a better system in place rather than putting that person in prison, institutionalizing them, letting them out, and the chances are that they're gonna commit another crime and get thrown back in prison because they got institutionalized in prison, and their whole mentality on they basically become a different person. And then the other thing that happens in prison that really isn't discussed enough is PTSD. A lot of people go to prison and they come out with PTSD.
And that's pretty much the entire point of it, making this entire time, fixing the culture. That's something that's got to be fixed too in the prison system. Like getting rid of the gang mentality, getting rid of this whole idea that just letting people like run wild like in the prisons. It's not always the case, but it's just like that's the start of it right there. But they're not going to do it because they're complacent. They're lazy in there. They're not going to fix that.
It's not laziness. Okay.
I'm sorry, dude. I'm sorry. We're going to disagree on that. I'm sorry.
It's so much more than just saying it's lazy, but I think we need to move on to the next topic because we are kind of running in circles right now, and we've been going kind of late.
Let me just make a quick point about the drug war, actually, because this kind of leads into the next topic. We said earlier, like the reason for Nixon's war on drugs was that he just didn't think that black people and hippies wouldn't vote for him. It was actually a bit more than that. It was to roll back and inhibit the democratizing effects of the popular movements of the 1960s. So there's a guy called John Ehrlichman. He was Nixon's domestic policy advisor. He said in 1994, he said the Nixon campaign had two enemies: the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know what we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. So that's Richard Nixon, rule of law president. But this actually ties into to a report that was commissioned in the 1970s called "The Crisis of Democracy" by the Trilateral Commission, and the crisis of democracy is concerned primarily with the increasingly ungovernable nature of of American democracy, thanks to the democratic movements of the 1960s, i.e., the anti-war left, the civil rights movement, etc. And so, as the author of the paper, as the author of the Trilateral Commission, of the Crisis of Democracy says, Truman had been able to govern the country with the cooperation of a relatively small number of Wall Street lawyers and bankers. But the most notable news source of power was the media. However, he noted that there was a second threat to democracy, and that was, quote, previously passive or unorganized groups in the population, such as blacks, Indians, Chicanos, white ethnic groups, students, and women. So that's like the majority of the population. And so that had to be suppressed. Part of that was the war on drugs. And they also concluded that the increasingly ungovernable nature of democracy, thanks to and the rise of these democratic movements, was caused by a, quote, failure of the institutions responsible for the indoctrination of the young. That's actually, all of these, by the way, are direct quotes from this report, and a hell of a lot of people from the Trilateral Commission went on to work in the Carter administration.
Great speech. Proud of you.
All right, Nathan, if you want to kick off the American imperialism, I'm interested to hear this, and then we can kind of weigh in on it.
Oh boy. Well, first of all, let me just say to Amanda's question, do I believe our country faces racism in any way near the same way that it's hard? Probably not. I think America is probably worse on race than we are, but we're not the best. Like, far from it. But okay, yeah, I've got my prepare yourselves. It's gonna be spicy. So a notable sort of characteristic of American foreign interventions is that they lie in a relatively sort of fixed geopolitical conception that remains invariant over time. And I sort of wanted to take some time to sort of point out what some of those fixed geopolitical conceptions that are present in American foreign policy, what they actually are. The moral principles of the American ruling elites are usually codified in the presidential doctrine of the administration of the time, and probably the most well-known and of the most importance would be the Monroe Doctrine, which was authored by the Secretary of State John Quincy Adams in 1823. He declared the principled opposition of the United States to European colonialism in Latin America. The Monroe Doctrine remained the defining foreign policy doctrine for the United States for the remainder of the 19th century and into the 20th. Early in the 19th century, France largely withdrew from North America because of the loss of their most profitable slave colony in Haiti. By the way, Haiti was forced to pay France reparations for the crime of freeing themselves. And the United States doubled in size practically overnight with the subsequent Louisiana Purchase under President Jefferson, the victory over Britain in the War of 1812, and the Mexican cession of what is now basically the southwestern United States after the annexation of Texas. Basically completed the formation of the continental United States. It was noted then, basically, that the influence of the traditional imperial triumvirate, which was Britain, France, and Spain, and Latin America, would naturally wane, and that influence over Latin America would naturally gravitate towards the United States because of its geographic proximity. And the enduring sort of legacy of the Monroe Doctrine was summed up by President William Howard Taft in 1913, when he said that, quote, "The day is not far distant when 3 stars and stripes at 3 equidistant points will mark our territory, one at the North Pole, another at the Panama Canal, and the third at the South Pole." And here's where the quote gets spicy. "The whole hemisphere will be ours, in fact, as by virtue of our superiority of race, it already is ours morally." And the belief that that our superiority of race grants a moral right to a continent of our own is one such fixed geopolitical conception that remains invariant over time. The Monroe Doctrine has been called imperial anti-colonialism, and American opposition to European colonialism is probably best illustrated by the American intervention in Cuba in 1898, when the United States colonized Cuba to decolonize Cuba from Spain. It's worth remembering that the Spanish-American War is often called the liberation of Cuba by American elites. In fact, what actually happened was the United States, the American intervention assured that Cuba would not liberate itself because they were immediately placed under an occupation. The Monroe Doctrine underwent a slight mutation under President Teddy Roosevelt. It was called the Roosevelt Corollary. I think it's probably more accurate to say the Monroe Doctrine's obvious intent was stated explicitly, which is that the United States asserted the right to intervene to, quote, "stabilize the economic affairs of Latin American nations." In this case, it was Venezuela after the Venezuela crisis in 1912. If they proved to be unable to pay the debts that were forced upon them by colonial nations, primarily Europe. So the US would in effect act as a broker between Europe and Latin America and would intervene to prevent Europe from intervening, just as it had colonized Cuba to prevent Spanish colonization. A similar tactic, you may notice, is employed by the Cosa Nostra. It's called a protection racket, where the legitimate state can't be relied on to provide ample protection from piracy or usury or debt slavery, and all of which are viable business models that are employed by colonial rulers. Woodrow Wilson, he was another very good guy. He famously issued the 14 points in a speech in January the 8th of 1918, which were principles for peace that would be used as a moral framework in the negotiations to end World War I. Wilsonianism emphasizes, amongst other things, both self-determination and the advocacy for the spread of capitalism. And Woodrow Wilson's commitment to self-determination soon proved to be at odds with his desire to, quote, "teach the South American republics to elect good men," end quote. And Wilson seemed at times to be actually quite determined to undermine his own doctrine by demonstrating the incompatibility between self-determination and the spread of capitalism. Woodrow Wilson was a believer in American exceptionalism. He described the United States as, quote, the light which will shine unto all generations and guide the feet of mankind to the goal of justice and liberty and peace. And Wilson demonstrated his commitment to self-determination with military interventions in the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Cuba, Panama, Honduras, and Nicaragua, who all swiftly learned the consequences of electing men considered bad by the United States. It's also worth pointing out that such effusive self-adulation, a light shining upon all generations and so on, wouldn't be actually out of place in a North Korean propaganda broadcast, and despite the effective public propaganda campaign to manufacture public support for joining the war, which was itself an outgrowth of the British propaganda campaign to convince American elites to join the war on the side of Britain. Public sentiment in the United States in 1918 was decidedly anti-war in the wake of World War I. The uneducated masses in a democracy are naturally anti-war, and they consequently see no benefit in traveling to a faraway land to fight and die. So it's necessary to educate the population in order to correct these subversive views. Fortunately for the learned business elites, sufficiently educated so as to understand the need for constant military escapades and diplomatic chicanery, Woodrow Wilson was not deterred by the war weariness of the population, and his intervention in the Russian Civil War, in which the United States sent troops to assist the White Army in committing pogroms and massacres against the civilian population, effectively instigating the Cold War, was a shining example of both advocating the spread of capitalism and guiding the feet of mankind to the goal of justice and liberty and peace. The Truman Doctrine, established after the Second World War, is a demonstration of the time-invariant nature of American foreign intervention. Greece was occupied by the fascists from 41 to 44. The largest anti-fascist group was the National Liberation Front, which consisted mainly of communist socialists and leftists. Violent struggles eventually broke out between the leftist resistance groups and Nazi collaborators like the National Republican Greek League and Organization X. The fighting quickly escalated into a civil war between the anti-Nazi resistance groups, supported initially by the Soviet Union and the Nazi collaborators, who were supported by Britain and the United States, in fact, which continued after the end of World War II. Allied support for the Nazi collaborators was decisive. Britain was no longer able to provide support, and the United States took over the role in 1947 under the presidency of Harry Truman. The Nazi collaborators were victorious in the Greek Civil War, in large part thanks to the aid provided by the United States and the actual lack of support from the USSR because of the Yugoslav-Soviet split. The Truman administration kicked off a counterinsurgency campaign in the Greek Civil War that killed like a couple 100,000 people, dismantled the political system, and installed a right-wing regime who, unlike the communist resistance, were willing to govern with the appropriate deference to the needs of American investors. And you'll probably have noticed that this isn't dissimilar to the Wilson Doctrine's commitment to the advocacy for the spread of capitalism, because the geopolitical worldview that drives American imperialism is very deeply rooted in American institutions. The practice of providing support for Nazi collaborators to ensure the defeat of communist movements that were in fact unaligned to the Soviet Union was dubbed containment by the Truman administration, and it's easy to see from the Greek example the parallel between the imperial anti-colonialism of the Monroe Doctrine and the imperial containment of the Truman Doctrine. The Eisenhower administration, and I am going to get the Eisenhower administration overthrowing the president of Guatemala, invading Lebanon, overthrowing the government of Iran, and planning the invasion of Cuba are further proof of the time-invariant commitment of the American ruling class to the advocacy for the spread of capitalism. In a staff meeting in 1958, 5 years after the Iran coup, President Eisenhower lamented the, quote, campaign of hatred against us in the Arab world, not by governments but by the people. The National Security Council set out to answer the question of why do they hate us, and they came to the conclusion that they believe the United States is seeking to protect its interest in Near East oil by supporting the status quo and opposing political or economic progress. That's an actual quote. The report goes on to point out that the American interests have led to, quote, close U.S. relations with elements in the Arab world whose primary interest lies in the maintenance of relations with the West and the status quo in their countries. That's another quote. And so immediately afterwards, and I do mean literally the same day, the Eisenhower administration authorized military intervention in Lebanon on behalf of the Shamoun regime, whose primary interest lay in the maintenance of relations with the West and the status quo, and the application of military force in preservations of regimes opposed to economic and social progress is another example of a fixed geopolitical conception that remains invariant over time. And the recruitment of Nazi war criminals is, in fact, not unique to Greece. Operation Paperclip is quite well known, but the United States also, for instance, recruited Klaus Barbie, who is a Gestapo torture specialist, to spy on the French in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War. Barbie had been sentenced to death by the French government for obvious reasons, and upon learning that he was on the American payroll, the French government requested that he be handed over to the authorities to face justice. The United States took a brave stance against capital punishment and helped Barbie escape to Bolivia through their contacts in the Roman Catholic Church, collusion with fascist priests. The collusion between the US intelligence agencies and Nazi collaborators in the church was instrumental to the CIA's subsequent Nazification of Latin America. And as time went on, it became increasingly difficult to maintain the cover of Nazi criminals as intelligence assets in post-war Europe. There was actually quite a few of them, meaning that, and by the way, they employed a lot of the worst ones, meaning that the United States could not employ them to continue spying on the communities that they'd just been terrorizing in the Third Reich. However, the United States was kind enough to continue employing this segment of the federal workforce, and in cases where continuing official relations with the employee were untenable, such as Barbie, they committed to help these employees find well-paying work elsewhere in Latin America. Nazi criminals such as Barbie became military advisors to US-backed police states in Latin America that were actually quite frequently modeled on the Third Reich. They became drug dealers, arms merchants, terrorists, and quote-unquote educators who helped the peasants improve their value in the job market by teaching them important skills like the torture techniques devised by the Gestapo, establishing a direct link between the death camps in Europe and the death squads in Latin America. The motivation for hiring Barbie and other Nazi criminals was explained at Barbie's trial in 1982 by Eugene Kolb of the Army Counterintelligence Corps. His, quote, skills were badly needed because, quote, his activities had been directed against the underground French Communist Party and the resistance. Given that the French Communist Party and the resistance became targets for repression after the end of the war by the American liberators, it's not unreasonable to assume that the United States saw a parallel between Gestapo activities in liberated Europe and its own activities in Latin America. The regime in Latin America that actually invoked the most hostility was modeled on the New Deal. The administration of Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala was the first and only democratic government in the country's history, which lasted for a whole 3 years before being overthrown by a CIA coup that installed Carlos Armas in his place. Armas was assassinated in 1957, after which Miguel Pastorelli, who was a member of the same party, secured a victory in the subsequent election. Supporters of the conservative, quite right-wing opposition rioted due to obvious voting fraud. The election was annulled, the army seized power, and Miguel Fuentes won a second round of elections in 1958, before immediately declaring a, quote, state of siege and seizing complete control of the government. The overthrow of a military dictator in Latin America is usually cause for significant concern, but Fuentes fortunately proved to be sufficiently deferential to the needs of business elites as his administration went from one corruption scandal to the next. The rollback of progressive agricultural policies passed under the Arbenz regime were that proved to be actually quite unpopular, surprise, surprise, and a series of armed struggles by leftist resistance groups against the dictatorship turned into the Guatemalan Civil War of 1960 to 1996, that's 36 years, in which American-backed governments are estimated to be directly responsible for 93% of the deaths of roughly 200,000 civilians. It's popular for American presidents to refuse to apologize for America, but the genocidal scorched earth tactics that were employed by the US-backed regime were so severe that they prompted President Clinton to publicly apologize to Guatemala in 1999. The US-backed genocide in Guatemala saw bodies of children with ears cut off and eyes gouged out, piled up in heaps underneath the overpasses in the outskirts of Guatemala City, victims of death squads financed by business elites, and the American national security state can be especially proud of its accomplishments, with a report by the Census Bureau attributing a count of 48,000 excess deaths per year in the 1980s, mostly due to intestinal infections, pneumonia, complications in the perinatal period, and nutritional deficiencies, all of which are diseases of poverty, meaning that the death toll of the dirty war in Guatemala, just one of the dirty wars that they waged in Latin America, is likely to have been significantly greater than the 200,000 deaths advertised. And it's worth mentioning that the Guatemalan genocide was not, in fact, the primary scandal of the Reagan administration. And although it is rare for an administration to be as singularly committed to lawlessness and criminality as the Reagan administration was, the dirty war was waged under presidents both liberal and conservative, proof positive that bipartisanship and unity are possible after all. Woodrow Wilson would likely take heart in the fact that control of American institutions has remained in the hands of men so dedicated to the noble quest of teaching the South Americans to elect good men. We are all citizens of imperial nations, and it should be our goal to wrest control away from these maniacs and dismantle the illegitimate power structures that they've constructed. We should be internationalists as the oligarchs are, and we should be, as Christopher Hitchens said, never witnesses to unfairness or stupidity, because the grave will offer plenty time for silence. Whew, there we go.
Is that it?
Okay.
I've got more.
Was that a workout for
Dude,
your mouth?
I'm sorry, but
I've got more. I've written a little bit. I've written a little
bit.
bit of history about
I'm sure you've got the entire history in the encyclopedia, but I'm sorry, dude. Like I'm not gonna lie. I stopped listening after like 1957, dude. I'm sorry. It's just like, it's like the thing is like that's a lot to unpack right there. I mean, is this more like a discussion, or is it just a lecture? I'm not trying to be a smartass. I'm just wondering.
No, it's fine. I mean, there's some people who will make the argument saying, oh, well, lucky we were fighting. It was the Soviet Union. And they'll often try to like justify, the US basically like breaking international law and, committing international terrorism and all of that stuff, and, I think that these kinds of views are just really, really dangerous.
Okay, so here's what it comes down to. I'm not going to try to justify anything, but the thing is like when it comes down to imperialism, the people that are hated the most are the ones that are actually the imperialists. It was like that with the British. It was like that with the Romans, the Mongols. It was like that with everybody. It would be no different if it was the Chinese that were in charge of everything. It would be no different if it was the Russians that were in charge of everything. Like if the Russians had an entire empire span across, we'd be saying the exact same thing about them. It's just because the United States happens to be the bad guy, no matter what, the way you look at it. And I'm not going to try to justify all these different coups that we've implemented right here, but it's important for us to have that in the history books. Like all that stuff needs to be taught in the history books because, I have no problem with that being taught in the curriculum. However, when I look at it right here, internationalist is never going to happen, in my honest opinion, ever. Because
wait, what?
The internationalist, the concept of us all just coexisting. I'm all about like working together with other nations, but somebody is always going to be the big dog. It's not always going to be the United States. Somebody else is going to try to take over. That's a reality, right? That's just part of like natural law. Because what happens when the more powerful nation conquers? What happens then? They implement the state law right there, according to John Locke.
Well, they also end up getting thrown out of the continent, which is what has been happening recently with the pink tide in Latin America.
Mm-hmm. But that's my whole entire point, though. Is like not everybody's in power forever. That's my entire point, though. And I'm not saying that we need to be in power forever. I'm all for all of us, kind of pulling back from certain bases across the world and stuff like that. But the United States contributes the most foreign aid than any other nation. Like Germany is like right behind us right now, and we have a lot of
that's largely because of NATO, though, and that's NATO as it exists today largely exists to clean up the crisis that it itself has caused. I mean, so for instance, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they were negotiating for like about the reunification of Germany, and that the Secretary of State James Baker, he promised that that NATO would not expand. And this is a quote from a National Security Archive document. He said that they would not expand 1 inch to the east. And of course, what happened immediately? Well, the NATO immediately expands to the east, and it's not unreasonable to for the Soviets to not want the Germans to be part of a hostile military alliance, because that was that had happened once in relatively modern history, but NATO's expansionism in Eastern Europe is basically the reason why NATO needs so much funding. It's to clean up the messes that it basically has caused.
So my only question is this: if not the United States, then who would you prefer to be the big dog then? Because somebody's going to be in charge. I mean, they don't.
No, they don't. In fact, the United States' position as an unchallenged hegemon is actually quite unprecedented in world history. Even in the days of empire, even in the days of the British Empire, it wasn't a completely unipolar world.
Well, I'm talking about in present times right now, because I'm going to break it down like this. Okay, when it comes down to foreign aid, it was actually explained to me by my friend Mike. The reason why we have foreign aid to begin with, think of it as an insurance policy, because Australia contributes a great deal of foreign aid to Malaysia, right? The second that Australia stops paying that foreign aid, Malaysia is then going to expand to who? China, because China is looking to expand that real estate right there. China is one of those countries that we need to be on the lookout for, because they actually are a very dangerous adversary. They've been building up their infrastructure, they've been building up their military, and they're just waiting for the opportunity for us to come. Why
do you think they're building up the military? I mean, who is it on the world stage that you think that a fledgling fledgling empire like China would be seeking to defend themselves from? Who is the primary aggressor?
They look at us as the aggressor.
Yeah, and they would be right.
Why would they be right?
Well, because it's literally basically the story of the entire post-war period.
Is that what people are? Well, here's the thing. That's why I'm saying this, is because anytime you are the empire, you are looked at as the bad guy, no matter how you look at it. But who's looked at it mostly when it comes down to foreign aid needing to be contributed? Anytime there's a tsunami or something like that happens, who contributes to that foreign aid right there?
Not every time, actually. There was
most of the time,
no. Actually, it's not. In fact, there's a very strong political component to it. Under the Sandinista government in Nicaragua in the 1980s, there was a hurricane, and it was absolutely devastating. And of course, the United States refused to send aid because the Sandinista government had overthrown the corrupt military dictatorship that the United States had put in place. So no, America. It's not.
You're talking about the 1980s, though.
Well, let's be honest. I think that's pretty much still how it works.
But the United States, when it comes down to most other situations, for example, right now we've got military advisors that are working across in South America, in Asia right now, in the Philippines in regards. That's because we have stakes in those regions. Now, China might say that we are necessarily the aggressor right there, but the thing is China is looking to expand their real estate right here. This is factual right here. That's why they're building tunnels that can reach across different parts of the world. They're trying to expand that real estate right there. China is looking to expand. I mean, this is something we have to be paying close attention to. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, American interests in Latin America, what that actually means is American business interests. I should make that actually very clear. The reason that the US overthrows democracy and implements these neo-Nazi terrorist regimes in Latin America is because they tend to be very very friendly towards U.S. business interests. In fact, it's the same story in Asia as well. For instance, you can take the mass killings in Indonesia, for instance, where the CIA was complicit in killing, but I think it was over 1 million people because of to protect American business interests. So when you say that the United States is protecting the national interests, what you're really saying is that American business interests are the national interests.
You can make that argument, but that's not the reason why they have some military advisors over there. They're actually trying to help. What they're trying actually, no, it's not, but you can think that. What they're trying to do is they're trying to actually establish to make sure that they actually have, like, in some militaries across the world, they're trying to make sure that they actually have a level of, not necessarily sophistication, but they're trying to give, like, a general sense of rapport within their own country, because some of these countries actually have, like, leaders that are actually fairly corrupt, actually. And that's
usually the ones that the US supports.
But we're trying to make ourselves, like, be able to leave from those areas. That's actually one of the main reasons why they built the advisory units to do this, actually.
So I don't. This isn't my topic, so I don't have a lot to weigh in. But my only thing is, what happens like when we go into these? It seems like every time we intervene, it's the path to hell is paved with good intentions. So every time we go and we intervene in a country, we end up with worse consequences.
What makes you think the United States had good intentions going into Iraq?
I mean that what we were sold. I think that
but I'm talking about I'm talking about like at the sort of policy planning level, like the level of like the president, the people who actually planned the war. What makes you think?
Oh no, I don't. I think
exactly.
Cheney owned Halliburton, and that was he stepped aside while he was vice president, but that I think was a big part of his agenda. And then you have the fact that the Bush family owns oil, and you can Iraq has lots of oil. So I mean, I think it was about oil, and I think it was about contracts and getting equipment over there.
You're not gonna hear any argument from me about that, because I think that, like, the government contractors over there, they made bank over there, while the rest of us were left with burn pits. So
one of the tendencies in the sort of that you tend to see, sometimes the United States will pull out and they will ostensibly support a democracy. So, like, we'll take, for instance, the case of Haiti, where the Duvalier crime family, which was supported by the United States, ruled from I think it was like the mid-50s. I think it was like 57 they came to power, or something like that. It's the late 1980s, and they were overthrown in the 1980s, which was much to the discontent of the Reaganites. The US reluctantly went along with a transition to democracy, and most likely they were thinking that the transitional government could be influenced in a sort of Duvalierism without the Duvaliers sort of situation, and and that basically you could end up effectively you would effectively like shield policy from democracy. So in what actually happens in in Haiti, Aristide wins in a landslide in 1990 with the US-backed banker candidate Marc Bazin, I think it's called. He only won 14% of the vote. There's a coup almost immediately in 1991 after the Aristide government starts, cracking down on corruption and drug trafficking and police violence. The US takes a very accepting stance. Actually, this is a little. To touch on immigration policy slightly, the US takes a very accepting stance towards Haitian refugees during the Aristide government in order to exaggerate their alleged crimes. And after the US coup, the OAS places Haiti under an embargo, and Bush, the Bush administration, they play up the alleged atrocities of the Aristide government, and they downplay the atrocities by the coup government. The Haitian refugees, they start fleeing, but the US reverses its immigration policy to downplay the crimes of the coup regime. Here's one thing you're going to like. The Bush administration, they quote unquote fine-tuned the blockade by instructing US companies to ignore it, and the Commerce Department figures showed that the US trade with Haiti in '92 wasn't actually significantly below the norm. Basically, the idea is that you can pull out and you can have the policies you want without necessarily the face of a dictator. So it would be like, it would be actually very much like it'd be very similar to like the Somozaism without Somoza policy of the Carter administration, or the Saddamism without Saddam of the Bush administration.
Well, I can't really speak on Haiti, so I'm gonna, I'll concede to the point of Haiti because I don't know enough about that. So
You made it.
I've made it. Really late.
Long
Sorry,
day.
guys. I know. Nah.
Somebody's
All right,
echoing.
gotta shut. It's me. I gotta shut it off. There you go. All right, it's off. Sorry, guys. It's so late.
Oh, no worries. We're up.
Oh, it's early here.
I had a fuck all of a night.
So I'm completely lost right now. I don't.
Yeah, like actually, when you talk about you were talking about China earlier, there's actually something interesting that happens with the revolution in China. It's actually called by American policy elites the loss of China. In other words, it's taken basically for granted by that, by the use of the word loss, that the United States has the implicit right to own China. You know what I mean? Because like I can't lose your bike. You know what I mean? But it's taken for granted that the United States has the right to own China, and they've kind of been salty about it ever since.
no, we don't necessarily own China right there. We have a great deal of business that takes place in China right now. The majority of our business, like if we were
No,
I'm China right. I don't know what you mean. Then could you?
I was talking about when I was talking about the revolution. That was called the loss of China. In other words, like they kicked out the American business interests, and that was a great loss because American business interests have the absolute unmitigated right to own China.
So, Sean, how do you feel about American imperialism?
I mean, it's stupid. I mean, coming from a veteran standpoint, I think that we. Well, I mean, the entire idea of being the world police is a lost cause at this point. It was a fruitless effort to begin with. It was just a show of might, and it's always been about natural resources and propagating our own ideas around the world. And it's I think that's been going on forever. Any great power in this world through the history of time has attempted to do this, and why would the United States be any different? So
I mean, the US in the post-war period is actually pretty unique, like in the sense that it is, after the Second World War, the US basically had, I think it was something like 6% of the world population and like 50% of the world's wealth, and like an unmatched military, and like no situation like that has ever existed in world history. Even in like the glory days of the British Empire, there was still the French and the Spanish, who could seriously damage the empire in an all-out war. But in the case of the United States in the post-war period, it's quite remarkable like how much just completely unchecked power they had. And I think you can see like the moral values of American elites reflected in the types of regimes that they're willing to tolerate in the sphere of influence where they've had the most influence, and that happens to be traditionally Latin America, basically because of geography, and it's just constant. The US, almost just as a matter of principle, supports corrupt military dictatorships because they are very amenable to US business interests.
That being said, I mean, it's always clearly been rooted in a white supremacist view.
That's also a big thing. Yeah.
We've always been trying to whitewash this entire world, time and time again, and you always see it. It's us against. You never see us going into predominantly white countries. It's almost always of somebody of a different persuasion, different complexion, different.
Well, in the post-war period, the United States hired ex-members of the Gestapo to spy on the Europeans.
Mm-hmm.
And
Not only that, we created the same. We created encrypting devices that all the European governments were using in their intelligence agencies. That even it was created in the United States, and we were able to crack every single one of them and know exactly what was going on there. We didn't have to spy per se, put spies in over there. We were selling them the technology that they thought was secure, but we still had access to.
Well, in the case of like sort of Gestapo members, they were spy is the wrong word. Interrogate, we'll say, enhanced interrogation is what we'll call it.
Torture.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, no such thing as enhanced interrogation. It's just torture. That's
I'm
strictly anti-torture. So
yeah, I mean that was why all of the ex-Gestapo were brought into Latin America, to instruct the neo-Nazi regimes that the US was supporting in the proper methods. There was you were talking about like white supremacy, and that was there's a whole sort of white supremacist religious ideology in American imperialism. It's called Manifest Destiny. It's basically the idea that the United States is like appointed by God to bring like civilization and slavery.
I was just
gonna
say Manifest Destiny is like pretty much the driving ideology behind. I mean, exactly. It's the idea that they are ordained. I said this earlier. They're even the British Crown. They had shared the same belief that they literally were entitled and ordained by God to take land and own it, and there was just an absolutism about that. And so absolutely.
On that point, I mean, what separates us from as a governmental entity and by a societal viewpoint, what separates us from the Nazi regime, who believed that they were specifically put on this planet to be they were the chosen people.
Yeah. I mean, to a large extent, to a large extent, the CIA basically was picking up where the Nazis left off in Latin America.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's funny actually. Like with the we were talking about like the religious element earlier. In the case of El Salvador is actually quite interesting. It was ruled by a series of American-backed dictatorships. In the 1970s, there was a growth of sort of popular organizations like peasant associations, co-ops and labor unions, and church-based Bible study groups and stuff like that. And that raised a real threat of democracy. And the Archbishop of El Salvador, his name was Oscar Romero, he begged the Carter administration, the Human Rights Carter administration, to not send military aid to the military dictatorship that controlled the country. And so immediately afterwards, a state of siege is declared in El Salvador, and the security forces basically begin like waging open war against the population. And the Archbishop is assassinated, like literally about 2 weeks later, by a neo-Nazi. His name was Roberto de Orbison, I think it is, in the American War on as part of like the American War on reformist groups in the Latin American Church. And of course, the Carter administration, Jimmy Carter, he described the assassination as a shocking and unconscionable act, having funded and trained the assassins. And of course, the 13-year civil war that followed kills about 100,000 people, with US-backed paramilitary death squads are estimated to be responsible for like 85% of the killings. Picking up where the Nazis left off.
That being said, I mean, I hear you focusing a lot on 1970s and 1980s Latin America, which was a major point in our imperialistic outgrowth. What we were doing to play chess with world politics at the time. But I mean, we can't simply focus on that. I mean, that's such a small.
Oh, it's not limited to that time period or to that or to that or to just Latin America. Now with
the Middle East.
I mean, right. I mean, we went from Latin America to the Middle East. That's what we started in Vietnam. We started in Korea. then moved on to Vietnam, then to Latin America, then to the Middle East. I mean, that's the timeline. We tried in places, but we were spreading democracy, right? That was what the goal was.
Quote unquote democracy.
Right. So it's, but I mean, we have to delve into almost all these different situations. I mean, ultimately, Korea was an absolute clusterfuck, but nowhere near on the level of Vietnam. If we really want to get to the rut of this, I mean, we have to talk about some of these earlier wars in the 1970s and 1980s.
I mean, I'm sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think by the standards, by the metrics that the American ruling elites set out to achieve, the Vietnam War was a great success. You know, countries entirely destroyed, millions of people killed, great success, because that was the point.
But we were stopping the spread of communism, though. Did we win? Were we successful in that?
No, not even remotely.
So,
I
mean, ultimately, I'm sorry, Alex. Go ahead.
No, there was a lot that played into that, though, because there was a huge anti-war movement back here where half the people were spitting on GIs when they came back home, labeling everybody baby killer right there, even though that's not necessarily what was happening. Then the Vietnam War was an absolute hell of a war. Mm-hmm. My father was in Vietnam, died from Agent Orange, as a matter of fact, which is another thing that still hasn't been recognized to this day, which is another thing that needs to get fixed. But there's a lot that, I mean, we can talk about like why we went to Vietnam in the first place, which was a lie as well. But when it comes down to it is that, you know, essentially America was fighting on two fronts. They were fighting against their own people back here, and then they were fighting against the North Vietnamese. And once we left, the North Vietnamese essentially slaughtered everybody that fought on our side, and then they took the country over anyway. So yeah, we didn't, which was absolutely atrocious. And then when the Hmong came over here to the United States, they were still treated like shit over here in a way, which I'm not going to, but it's just, Vietnam was a horrendously bad war, and it's still something that, you know, but apparently now Vietnam is apparently a great country. I don't know, I've never been there, so, but it's just, you know, we didn't stop communism, even though I'm strictly anti-communist, and honestly, I think.
I mean, like the
strictly anti-communist. So
the massive increase in atrocities after the American aggression is actually like a predictable pattern. So, for instance, in the with the bombing of Kosovo in the 1990s, I mean, you know, obviously, you know, pretty serious atrocities going on before the US intervenes. But I think it was Madeleine Albright. She basically publicly predicted that, you know, they basically knew that, you know, that atrocities by the regime would sharply escalate after the US bombing campaign started, which they did. Of course they did.
That's the going trend. That's always been the going trend. Yeah, I mean, that you could sit there and you could look at the status of forces agreement in Iraq of 2007, and there was a timeline for troop removal, but we didn't adhere to that troop removal because you simply, at that point, you can't. You know what the aftermath will become once you remove the troops at that point. When you disrupt a region, which is what we do, I mean, it's ultimately what we do. We literally disrupt a region that may already be chaotic before we get there, but we disrupt it further. And so long as we're doing that, the moment we remove ourselves from that situation, it goes even further to hell. Now, not where our hands are not clean from that. I mean, we have absolutely escalated it to get to that point. We have no idea if it would have, and somebody just said, Don said power vacuum. He's absolutely right. I mean, from the moment, we have no idea what good or bad. It's a double-edged sword when we do this. You have no idea if that region will continue to go down the rabbit hole that it's already going and get to a point that they get, that it is after we leave, or if we only get to that point after we leave because we were there in the first place.
Well,
you know,
when it comes down to Iraq, it's a lot more, you know, there's a lot more to it at that, because, you know, when it comes down to it, the first Iraqi military defense force that was created in 2003, 2004 was the ICDC, Iraq Civilian Defense Corps.
Mhm.
They were given 10 days of training and then they were sent out to fight. That was already the wrong answer, looking back, of course, right?
Mhm.
Now, the main problem, though, is that, we trained the Iraqi army, the Iraqi police, and the ERU, and we trained some of their government officials. The problem is, though, is a lot of these guys were just taking the American dollars and not doing what they were supposed to do with it. They'd been given plenty of guidance on what they were supposed to do. A lot of the Iraqi police and Iraqi army was trained on how to police up their neighborhoods and how to fix their neighborhoods. Had they actually taken their job seriously, ISIS would have gotten wiped out quite easily, actually. Because ISIS, the only reason why they were terrifying was when they captured people. That's it. These guys were not effective fighters. They only won by one thing: intimidation. That's how you win, because they were the ones that were getting the most attention. Look at the people that they put forward to put out their propaganda pieces. These people are like damn near professional Hollywood-style people, but that's because that's the message that they go for. Now, when it comes down to the people of like Baghdad, for example, they told us, once you guys leave, we can't trust these guys because the Iraqi
I'll be right
police are
back.
corrupt.
Give me 1 second. I need water.
Okay. The Iraqi police are corrupt. The Iraqi army was corrupt. But the thing is like there's only so much that we can do because the hands were tied from the troops to actually make sure that the standards are being followed right there.
Well,
and, this is not like an opinion. This is a matter of fact right here.
Right. But on that same token, you're discussing the training of their paramilitary forces or their military forces overall, their police forces as well. But on that same token, we could sit here and we could talk about the troops of Kurdistan that we have funded for decades and have on countless occasions turned our backs on, and we allowed them to get essentially slaughtered by ISIS.
Which I was so pissed about that because I trust the Kurds. I've worked with the Kurds before. So.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think actually the case of Nicaragua is like in a couple of ways quite comparable to what's going on in Iraq for two reasons. Number one is like the funding and the bankrolling of like corrupt, sort of elements within the society, and number two is the U.S. obstruction of the peace process. So in a lot of ways, the Somoza military dictatorship in Nicaragua is a lot like the Saddam Hussein dictatorship. It's it's completely corrupt, completely deferential to U.S. business elites. Jimmy Carter, when he came to power, he boasted that the United States would, quote, take the lead in promoting universal human rights. And so it was with the utmost of respect for human rights that the Carter administration then conspired with the Nicaraguan National Guard to kill 40,000 civilians in a bombing campaign of civilian areas, and the National Guard's continued war against the population. But that war had been going on for quite a while at the time. But Somoza's regime was basically overthrown. He fled to Miami with the rest of the treasury, and the Guard essentially collapsed. Carter then flew the Guard commanders out of the country in planes with Red Cross markings, which is a war crime, and then he began to constitute the National Guard on Nicaragua's borders. And the neo-Nazi regime in Argentina that the United States had also put in place, they were kind enough to take time out of their busy schedule of murdering their own civilians to assist in the build-up of the Contra forces. And by the end of the Carter administration, the Guard had already killed about 40,000 civilians, and they were, quote, as Trump might say, the Guard were standing back and standing by to launch a massive terrorist war against Nicaragua, which they immediately did as soon as Reagan took office. And that was combined with a massive illegal economic warfare program that was designed very deliberately to create famine and disease. But pretty incredibly, like the Contras never really became a viable military force, despite like just the absolutely massive U.S. support and the World Bank. I think it was I think it was like some international like finance institution. They concluded that the quote was, "Nicaragua has made noteworthy progress in the social sector, which is laying the basis for a long-term socio-economic development." And to paraphrase Bush Sr., that aggression could not stand. And so American policymakers became completely frenzied in their, just complete hatred for the Sandinista government. They pressured the World Bank to to terminate assistance. They launched the terrorist campaign, waged an illegal war. The Contras were encouraged to commit terrorist attacks against infrastructure and etc. And the US refuses to send aid after the hurricane, even though it was much worse than, I think it was an earthquake that had happened under Somoza. And the reason they refused is because the money probably wouldn't have gone into the hands of US-backed thugs as it would have done under Somoza. So that's one sort of comparison. Like when you have the corrupt regime in power, the US is very willing to send aid, and because it's primarily just actually being used to line the pockets of just violent thugs. And then when the Sandinistas come in, well, there's no military aid at all. And then secondly, there's the obstruction of the peace process. So in the US held peace talks in '87, they agreed to move the elections forward by a few months in exchange for for the demobilization of the Contras and the end of the terrorist war. The US agreed to that publicly, and then, of course, they immediately tripled CIA supply flights for the Contras, basically sabotaging the peace process. And they made it clear in the subsequent election that the illegal economic embargo that they were placed under would continue if the Sandinistas won, which, of course, surprisingly enough, they didn't. So the United States was, very consistent in obstructing the peace process after they were withdrawing, even though they, by all accounts, they had essentially lost the war in Nicaragua, despite just a massive war of hysterical aggression.
Yeah. Again, when it comes to Nicaragua, I'm not really gonna comment on, like, the Middle East is usually where I kind of stick to anyway. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, there's a parallel between, like, the obstruction of the peace process in Nicaragua as there is in Iraq, and frankly in a lot of the illegal wars that the United States is waging in the Middle East.
Well, when it comes down to the Middle East, like, that's why they have, like, advisory units there, because it worked in Kuwait, but that's just because Kuwait wasn't necessarily under a dictatorship for such a long period of time. When it comes down to Iraq, was that Saddam had those people under his thumb for long periods of time. And, like, for example, Saddam's sons, Uday and Qusay, they would do horrendously bad things to their own citizens. And once you actually overthrow those guys, you're not exactly expecting the people just to kind of, like, follow suit and just welcome us in. It would be no different if we were to go into North Korea tomorrow. We would be looked at exactly the same. And some of their human rights violations are some of the worst, like worse than the Nazis actually in North Korea. And when it comes down to Iraq, I mean, Iraq right now is a pivotal point right now strategically in the Middle East. It's the key to the Middle East right now. And I'm not saying that we do need to stay there, but it's now become like, now the people that are vying for right now is countries like Iran. Iran is now vying for power in there. And right now they're the ones they're the ones that are actually trying to take the fight to ISIS right now. And obviously, if you're the ones to take the fight to ISIS, then obviously you're going to vie your support to them. That's some of the things that are taken into consideration right now. And when it comes down to, like, conflicts right now, the people look to the U.S. for some reason because we are the world police, but they look to us, and that's why, because if we don't do it, we're looked at as, oh, well, you guys want to fight here, but you're not going to fight here kind of deal. That's the way the United States is looked at right now. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's the way things are.
Well, there's a reason that there's a perception for that, and the reason is that there's a consistent hypocrisy in the types of regimes that the United States claims to support, and the types of regimes that the United States actually supports. And that was, I think the Carter administration declaring its support for human rights and whatever the fuck, and then supporting the Nicaraguan National Guard. That's a pretty good example of exactly that.
So we discussed novels written from 1976 to 1978.
I don't know if you guys have anything you want to close out with. We're almost at 4 hours though for tonight.
Holy shit, we are.
I'm looking. It's like almost like 2 o'clock in the damn morning. So
I know I got on late. I gotta cut this here, guys. I'm sorry I got on so late, but
life happens, man. Life happens to everybody.
Yeah.
Well,
What
in short,
talk about it
screw
all.
American imperialism.
Yeah.
Yes. I was over my head. That's out of my wheelhouse, so I can't really discuss it too much. Other than I know we're way too involved in world politics than we should be.
Yeah, I feel like I should just say, like, today, American imperialism in Latin America is less of like the sort of outright thuggery, and it tends to operate more through lawfare, which is basically the use of like politically motivated witch hunts against your opponent.
That, I mean, again, and not to cut you off, but I mean, that's why every war from here on out will be a proxy war. I mean, we started seeing it in Syria, and that's what the rest of them are going to be from now on. There's not going to be boots in the sand any longer. There's not going to be. This is all about moving chess pieces around to get your desired result. So,
when it comes down to it, like, we can talk about all day, like how the United States should not get involved. Like, once we pull back, there's still going to be a power vacuum, and then there's going to be people that are waiting for us to just pull back, that are going to take full advantage of the situation. But they're not going to stop in those regions. They're going to come, they're going to spread all throughout. And this is something that I'm predicting that will take place. And I'm not saying that we need to be the only force to hold them back. Everybody needs to contribute evenly across that board. Because, you know, I'm one of those people that I try to see from the big picture. I'm not just talking about like China. I'm talking about Russia, and I'm talking about like other countries like within the Middle East that we have to lay focus on right now. North Korea, I'm not too worried about right now, because right now they've got rockets, but I don't think they're necessarily a threat to us, because China's already made it clear that if North Korea attacks us, they're on their own. But if we attack North Korea, then they're going to have their backs. That's something that, so it's not them I'm really worried about right now. It's these other Islamic nations that could very well band together. You know, I'm not. This is just a prediction. I'm not trying to loop them all into one category, but this is just what I'm looking at right now, big picture wise.
I say fuck around and find out. That's what I say.
I mean, what you have to be wary about with this sort of reluctance to pull out in case, you know, somebody fills the power vacuum, is that the majority of the sort of really like evil terrorist groups would I'm echoing. Never mind, it stopped. The really evil terrorist groups that would fill the power vacuum are in general actually created by the American intervention in the first place, and the longer you spend there, the more these groups are going to form.
So it looks like we're staying there then.
Oh well, we'll always be over there.
To create more terrorists.
We don't. When we go somewhere, we
happen.
don't leave. You know, we build a military base there.
Yeah, well,
I mean that though. I'm just a little AP on.
All right. Any other final last closing thoughts on this topic from anybody?
Nothing.
It's yeah.
It's late.
Right.
Lula Libre.
I mean, we're literally 3 hours 45 minutes. I mean,
it's a little too long.
I hope everybody had fun.
We try to keep it at 2.5 hours, but
it was late to the party. But it's you know, it's that time. You know.
Well, Professor Nathan, he the professor.
That was
No, it was a good discussion. Everybody remained polite and everybody was respectful, so it was good. So
nobody was a dick on the show.
Goddamn capitalist scum.
Everybody followed the rules.
Capitalism. I'm a diehard capitalist. Responsible capitalism. That's another discussion we can have another time, though.
Nah, don't open that.
You say, yeah. That's not because I
no such thing.
Capitalist theory that you.
Bye, guys. Good night.
All right, take care.
Next week, capitalism.
Why it sucks.
Why it sucks. All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you for watching. Sorry, it kind of went a little late. I think we're still toying out some format stuff. So thank you for staying tuned. If you watched the whole time, appreciate it. And we will see you later this week.
See ya.
Peace.
Bye.